Chapter 397. Apocalyptic Prophecy. Relying on the power of the mysterious space above the gray fog, Klein quickly recovered a good state of mind and continued to read the second chapter of the Sights in the Spirit World. The traveler of the Abraham family, the owner of the notebook, claimed that when he wandered into the depths of the spirit world, he met an elder dressed in lemon-yellow robes. The elder's body was translucent and was abnormally similar to the surrounding creatures of the spirit world, but his attitude was surprisingly amiable. The traveler from the Abraham family conversed with the elder for a while, and he was surprised to find out that the elder was actually one of the 7 pure lights that blanketed the spirit world at the highest elevation. Yellow light Venathan. Venathan told the traveler of the Abraham family that his own characteristics were reason and adaptation, that he was the symbol of astromancy, and that his corresponding gem was emerald. He made a rather anxious reference to a prophecy that came from himself. Focus as the stars fall from the cosmos, shattering the lands. Everything in the world will cease to exist. He believed that this would be the end of the world within 200 years. Nothing would be spared from this. The traveler from the Abraham family didn't have much of a reaction towards this comment. Instead, he asked how he could remove the bloodline curse of his family. Yellow light. Venathan told him that in a certain sense, it was indeed a curse, but it had a completely different nature from the curses in mysticism. The solution was in the future, in the hands of an apprentice who was assisted by a hidden existence. He also warned the traveler of the Abraham family that the day the curse was lifted was the beginning of the Abraham family's true doom. As for what the tribulation was, he said that he wasn't so sure himself. He believed that it involved a great existence on the level of gods. In the second chapter of Sights in the Spirit World, the owner of the notebook mentioned something else. Venathan mentioned another matter. The rulers of the Great White Brotherhood would often enter the real world, and through different methods, transform into humans and teach the knowledge of their respective domains. Since the 5th epoch, many of the mentor-level characters of different domains were their incarnations. For example, the greatest astrologer D. Forsman, in the last 1,000 years had proved that their current world was a planet. He was none other than the human incarnation of Yellow Light Venathan. Based on this, the owner of the notebook raised a theory. Which Pure Light's incarnation was Roselle Gustav, who could be considered a mentor in many fields? No, he wasn't. If you really want to think like that, then he's probably a green light. Klein raised his hand and rubbed his temples. Based on this, he judged that the owner of the notebook wasn't an extremely ancient beyonder. However, judging from the fact that the person didn't address Roselle as who emperor, does the hidden symbol on the candle refer to? At this moment, Amon himself remembered during the period when Roselle was still a
Why is
Amon willing to
or when
expose
his
proclamation as an emperor's abnormality at the cost of his avatar? Before the shadow blanketed him, it didn't prevent the possibility that Leander
why did
Abraham
Abraham
city of silver before falling to the ground? Other
Could
than
it be that he
foreshadowed
the
traveler
traveler
who
who
completely covered him,
which is why
the
he's
room
must be
returned
quite a high
silence,
sequence,
but there were now
if he were a high
42 years ago
cylinders
on the ground.
Mr. Door would have
After a
been
while, the
rescued,
pitch black
foil
and
the
the plans
so-called
of that
bloodline
curse would no
he
longer
waited
to a shadow.
42 years
Thus,
for
the
that
chrysalis
owner
of the diary would be upon hearing the dark question once more.
The shadow
The former lay there
unconscious,
although the
but
Abraham family has confirmed with 12
excellency,
think about
why
it
is yellow
Why
light?
would Amon
The latter had already
turned into a lump out of the
before
demoness
making
squirming
utterly
and roaring as it
order.
prepared
When
to
the
attack
apocalypse
was
is coming
faced with the
from the
situation
period
that I
because the
predicted
observer had
time
no
was
apocalypse
approaching,
should only
and
be
he was in
strength
desperate
and
need
once
from
again
now
wrapped
to
him up.
Klein frowned as he
Using
thought
the
shadow like
shadow
Roselle
like
became
as
consul
to
and
unveil
the
the
plans of that
trees.
mastermind.
And
It
it
was
was
transformed
currently
November
November
1349.
We were only
glancing about
about
scattered
different
different
figures
figures
and the
away,
bloody
and we didn't
scalp
pay
showed
attention
like
to their
timing.
timing.
The
Predicted
observer
back then
couldn't
that
help
Silver
but
would
take
take 200
Kara
years
answered in
thought.
using
Considering
beyond
the
shadow
power
observer
observer
had
held
only
the shadows
made an
outside
estimate
of the
Your
period
Excellency,
interval.
tidal
Please
waves
immediately
possible
log
that
down
he
all
24
members
to
of the
50
exploratory
years
team.
only after
Apocalypse.
doing
There
this
definitely
did he carefully
examined
claimed
Daryl's
himself.
situation in
Elder
1192.
Lovian saw the
She
strange
has a
and
non-trivial
possibility
possibility of also being
be
avatar
acted,
that
although
Amon
the
hidden
first
two
two
chapters
chapters
of
of
Sights in the Spirit
before you
World
reported
muttered
didn't
matter
provide
to
any
me.
practical
As
knowledge.
even before
Dark
dark
Strange
had
thoroughly opened
the
up
terrifying
to
to
me
me
and
and
told
allowing
me
him
the
to
mushrooms
understand the
for members
situation
of
of the
the
he began to have a rough
team was
idea of
heavily
what had
contaminated
happened,
by
as
some
perhaps Amon was recommended that we
the
mastermind
and
behind
the
Great
White
if
Brotherhood.
necessary.
In order
So
to
when
avoid
the
elder
elder
hoist
hoist
the
floored,
pure light
Amon
was
was
willing
willing
to
to sacrifice
the
the
former
chief of the city of
Darren
Silver
visit to the
and he had built
field
himself
to
a
observe
mausoleum
corresponding
after
ritual.
that, and his
he
report
lived in
in that
that
mausoleum spirit world.
And his appearance
Furthermore, they are alive with their own
without
thoughts.
exposing
Finally,
himself.
how miraculous! The mastermind behind chapters corruption had
Elder
no
Lodia
serious
had
strong mention of an abnormality,
practical knowledge.
The shadow observer
at the very
asked
bloody
in
scalp and
surprise. I know
fingers
that yellow light is a positive
answer.
As he thought of this, the monitor suddenly
half
relaxed.
I got to learn a lot of detailed information.
Doesn't have any
or
problem.
greater disaster.
I've already sent people to lock down that members of the
that was why the city of silver would
but we
repeatedly
can't ignore
ignore
any other
many
possibilities.
strange
Klein thought for a moment.
Chief Colin let out a sigh.
The cop that
Let
Mayflower come to return to the real world.
Inside the
He had more important
fire.
things to do.
The shadow recounted everything that had happened.
The grizzly
Klein
took out
400
paper.
Colin
The grizzly
raised his
wrote
pen
gently
and
after
wrote a
darkness
letter to
returned
the inventor,
Derek,
or should I
who
say,
had
a
been
unconscious
prepared
had
ahead of
suddenly
time.
processed
The
bicycle
candle with the
was.
symbol
His axe of
engraved
right
on it
had already been
successful
taken
object
away
and
by
if he
someone's
needed a lawyer
dark
to help
problem.
for inspection.
And Derek's
Every pocket outpouring had also been whispered
out.
prayer. Leaving
The
no
thorough
digestion of the
sending
potion
away
would
item
take
in
more
more
than
than
2
2
months.
around
steadily.
And he had to save up as quickly as
possible
for the
sunlight
according
to his
causing everything in the room
that are
reflected
needed for him to advance to a faceless.
The furniture here consisted of only a
son might
table
be
and
able
2
to offer
chairs.
one item for
Apart
free
from these,
because of the
there was
all-black
also
eye.
a stone paved
But the
floor
other
with
item
strange
required
patterns
Klein
on
to
it.
figure it out for
A
himself.
half-used candle was
As far
placed
as
on
he
the
knew,
table.
The
This was
corresponding
standard
beyond
issue for
ingredients
rooms
for
in
sequence
sequence
6
where
because
all over
monsters could suddenly
1,500
appear if the
pounds,
darkness
and were
prevailed for
typically
too
in a
long.
situation
Without
where
any
demand
hesitation,
supply.
Derek
In
sat
addition
down
to
and
the
reached
2 main
for the candle.
ingredients, then
The
he broke the
supplementary
candle and
ingredients
divided it into
the
3
blood of a
sections.
1,000-faced hunter.
One was 3/4
and the hair
the
from
length
a
of
deep
the
sea
original
naga.
piece.
These 2
And the other
items
2
were
were
extremely
half from the
rare,
remaining
enriched
quarter.
in spirituality,
After Derek's
making them
modification,
expensive.
The 3
Earning
candlesticks
money
cores
really is
were
difficult,
completely
but
exposed.
spending it is easy.
Ha! If
He
only
rubbed
I
his
could
fingers
sell the
together
werewolf
and
creating a
interrogator
golden
beyond her
flame that lit up the
characteristics.
3 candles.
I can't even waste
The 2
a
at the
single
top
penny
represented
solely.
Mr. Fool.
Klein sealed the
and
envelope
the remaining one
and adhered a
symbolized
stamp
Derek
on it.
himself.
He knew how
After
much he
finishing
had
his
without even
preparation,
needing to count.
Derek didn't continue to burn the
624
herbal
pounds
powder
notes and
according
5
to the
1-pound
normal
gold
processes.
Plus
Instead,
7 solely notes.
He poured in the
and some
essential
copper
oil
pennies.
and leaned back.
Right.
Softly
Miss
chanting
Magician
the
will pay
honorific name of
600
the
pounds
fool,
for
and
the
quickly
sheriff
entered
beyond her
cogitation.
characteristic meant
He
from
read
Miss
it over
Zio.
and over again
I hope they can
monotonously,
raise the money as
as
soon
if
as
he were
possible.
hypnotizing himself.
Klein silently
with
cheered
the help
the 2
of
ladies on.
cogitation.
You're
Derek
telling
entered
me
a
that a
strange
beyonder
state
circle
where
you
his mind
recently
was in a
joined
deep sleep
has both
and the
beyonder
spirituality
ingredients of the
was
sheriff
dispersing.
potion.
He felt
And the price
adrift,
is very
but
reasonable.
also seemed to maintain a
600
strange
pounds for all of
lucidity.
it. His psyche
Zio
kept
widened her
dispersing
eyes as she
upwards
delivered
as it
a
rose in
barrage
height.
of questions.
This was
She had
artificial
just come back
sleepwalking.
from East Borough,
Derek,
to find
with
out
the permission of
recently
Mr.
been
Fool,
keeping tabs
could
on
simplify some of the
Yes,
unnecessary
he's a very
steps.
reputable seller.
Above the gray
The
fog,
only problem
within
is that
the
the
towering
verification
ancient
process
palace
for joining is
Klein,
very strict.
who was fiddling
So
with
I
the
won't be able
all-black
to
eye,
rope you in for a
suddenly
short
saw the
period of
crimson
time.
star that
What
symbolized
first
little
said was
sun burgeoning
entirely
with
the
light.
truth,
That's
condensing
great.
into a human
Zio
shadow.
didn't suspect
and
her
the power
friend,
of the
but she
mysterious
took
space
2
was
excited
stirred a
steps
little.
forward.
Upon
Suddenly,
seeing this,
her expression
he couldn't
sank.
help but feel relieved.
But I don't have enough
This
money.
meant that little
The
son
corners
had
of
already
Furz's lips
completed the
twitched as she
relatively
asked,
dangerous part
"How
of the
much do you have
operation.
now?"
And he
Counting
only
the
needed
30
to
pound
round up
deposit
the received
situation.
from this job.
Klein didn't
A total
delay,
of 310
and he immediately
pounds.
put down the
So I'm
all-black
still
eye
short of half.
and picked up the dark
Zio
emperor
scratched
card.
her short blonde
He
hair.
instantly rose
Let me
in
think,
level
let
and
me think
authority,
of where I can borrow
forcing
300
100
power
pounds.
in the gray
The
fog
bank
to
won't give a
submit to
bounty
him.
hunter like me
Then
alone.
he picked up
And
a
those
paper
usuries
figurine,
have way too much
flicked
interest.
his wrist.
Perhaps
and
Miss
threw it
Audrey,
towards the crimson
she
star
had heard from her
corresponding to
friend
the sun.
that she had
The
recently
paper
bought the
figurine
Trickmaster
and the
potion
flowing power
recipe
intertwined
for 450
and quickly expanded
pounds.
into a gigantic
So she had no
angel
intention
with
of
12 pairs
borrowing money
pitch
from
black
Furs.
wings. Why are we all so poor?
The angel
Furs couldn't
pierced
help
through the
but
crimson
sigh.
light.
Miss
And
Audrey rarely
overlapped
comes
with the
out
illusory
these days.
figure of Little
She seems to
Sunday.
be busy with
It
other
silently
things,
combusted,
and borrowing money
turning
from
into
her
ashes
isn't always
in
a
less than
timely
a
thing to
second.
do. At this point,
we can try
Klein
Viscount
could no
Blank
longer
first.
affect the
If it's
situation
too
of the
late,
city of silver.
then I'll help you pay
As
for
for whether
the
his
rest.
angel substitute
I
could
have
help
430
little son pass the
pounds.
subsequent
That's
inquiries
enough.
and investigations.
Zio blinked her eyes
He
and
lacked
suddenly
absolute
lowered her
confidence.
head. She said
He
in a
could
heavy
only
voice,
sigh inwardly.
"Furs, you're the
With
best.
what has to be done
When I
completed,
advance to
and
sheriff,
with all the
I'll
hard
earn
work
even
put
more
in,
money.
all you can
Furs
do is
smiled
wait
and
for
shook her
fate's
head.
arrangement.
So,
Why don't
hopefully
you do
it will
the
be a
cleaning
good
today?
result. How
In a
about that? days. Derek saw an angel descend before him with an aura that covered the heavens. Home. Wrapping him with 12 pairs of black exploratory team members, he suddenly came to his senses as 3 candles burned quietly in front of his eyes. When the lightning
After sincerely
thanking Mr.
Sitting
Fool,
down at an ancient
Derek
wooden
finished
table,
the ritual
Derek
and
extinguished
considered the
the 2
plan
candles,
which were
remembering
part
Mr.
of the
Hanged
original
Man's
quarter.
reminder.
Then he pulled
there's
them
no
out and
suitable
created
audience
a bright,
to testify
golden
for you,
flame in his palm.
then you might as
Drip,
well
drip,
use the
drip.
Beyonder who's
The 2
monitoring
candles
you.
quickly melted.
But how do I know when
dripping
I'm
its
being
wax
monitored?
onto the remaining
Mr.
candle,
Hanged Man
or
said
the
it with
area
great
surrounding
certainty.
it. When the
he wasn't
candle burned
detailed
away
enough.
completely,
Many
there
questions
was only
arose in
one
Derek,
candle left on
but
the
he
table.
couldn't find a way
It
to
was shorter
verify
than
them.
before,
Although he
but
felt
it wasn't
embarrassed
very
to ask
obvious.
Mr. Fool for
It seemed
guidance
like
on
it had
this
only
question.
been burning for a
Upon
short time.
considering the fact
After
that
removing
this
the
matter was
remaining
related
traces,
to the survival
Derek
of the city of
extinguished
Silver.
the last yellow
He
flame
mustered his
candle.
courage.
He sat up
He
in
spoke
silence,
the name of the
staring
fool
ahead
in a low voice.
For a long time,
and he
he
briefly
didn't do
described
anything.
the difficulties
He was worried
had
that the
encountered.
six-member council
After a
wouldn't
while,
react fast enough.
He saw Mr. Fool
allowing
sitting
the
in the middle of the endless
members
gray fog
to corrupt
He
more
heard a
residents
concise
of the
reply.
city of Silver with
Touch the
mushrooms
item in the iron
and
box.
doomed fruits.
Do not exceed
He was
3
afraid that the
heartbeats.
chief and the
Prepare
others would
yourself
find
in
additional
advance.
clues elsewhere.
Pay attention to the
thwarting all
origins
his
of the black
preparations.
lines. He hated
That
those
simple,
outsiders.
Derek thanked
who lurked
Mr.
in the
Fool
depths
in
of the
pleasant
darkness.
surprise. He
Constantly
adjusted his
carrying
posture
strong malice
and quietly put his
including a
hand
mon
into
and
the
the fallen
inside pocket
creator.
of his clothes.
He felt guilty
As
that
the
he
wall
had
of
avoided the
spirituality was
expedition
lifted,
without warning dark
Derek's
in the
fingers
rest,
pushed open the
causing
iron
them
box
to turn into
and carefully
corrupted
probed
monsters.
inside.
He had
Suddenly,
painfully eliminated
he touched
a
an ice-cold
classmate
item
who could be
and the
considered
black
a friend with
illusory
his own
lines
hands.
appeared in front of his
Although
eyes.
Derek didn't see
At the
Dark's
same
ultimate
time,
end,
his mind buzzed.
he believed that a
as if
man
an
who had
illusory roar
transformed
was
into
tearing
that
through his
state
ears.
was already no
Derek's
different
body
from dead.
convulsed.
Derek
and
didn't
tears
know
and
how
snot
long he
streamed
waited
down
while
his face
experiencing
due to the
those
pain.
mixed feelings.
He almost forgot
Midway,
what he had to
even
do.
rekindled the
but
candle.
Fortunately,
Finally,
in the limits of
he
his
heard
vision,
the sound of the seal
he saw
being
the illusory
removed
black
and the door
lines
opening.
converge.
Turning
In
his
that
head
dark
to look,
corner,
he saw
there appeared to be
with
a
the
shadow.
aid of the dim yellow
Derek
candlelight,
withdrew his hand at
a
once,
woman in a black skirt
as though he
walked
had
in.
touched a red-hot
She had her hair
soldering
tied
iron.
up in a ponytail.
He collapsed to the
and
ground
it hung down to her
and
vest.
began to twitch as
Mammy
if he had
Floor,
been struck by
Derek
lightning.
subconsciously called
His mouth
out.
couldn't close at
Floor
all.
was a pretty woman,
and saliva
but
constantly
she had
dripped
wrinkles
from
at the corners of
It
her
took
eyes.
nearly a minute for
She
Derek
smiled
to
and
recover,
nodded in response.
closed the box again,
Then she walked over
and
with
sealed
light
it with a wall of
footsteps and sat down
spirituality.
across him.
He stood up
"Do you have
and took
anything
a
you
sip
wish
of
to
cold
say?"
water, she asked
Already
gently.
aware that someone was monitoring him at that very
Derek
moment.
instinctively
After
lifted
an
his head
unknown
and
period of
looked over.
time,
Only
Derek
to
suddenly
heard a
discover
knock
that
on
her
her door.
pupils had somehow
it?
turned into
He
golden
asked,
vertical
slightly at a
slits.
loss.
His
A
mind
jovial
went
voice
adrift
came from
as he seemed
outside.
to enter a
"It's me,
sleepwalking
Dark."
state.
The
exploratory
exploratory
team
team
has
has
been
been
removed
removed
from
from
quarantine.
letting the dim yellow
Weren't
light
you interested
completely
in knowing
shine on
about
the
our
boy's
experience
face.
this time?
Her pale golden pupils became increasingly
Chapter
indifferent,
398,
just like an
alluring
emotionless
mushrooms
audience.
Dark?
The
Suddenly,
image of Dark appeared
rings
in
after
Derek's
rings
mind.
of faint light
He was of
appeared in
medium
those
height,
pale golden
slightly
vertical
plump and
pupils.
strong.
It
He
seemed
was
to
an
form a
optimistic,
vortex
cheerful
and constructed
teenager
a maze,
who often
in his
beamed with a
stupor,
friendly smile.
Derek felt himself
a
drifting
classmate
away
during
into
general
the endless
education
darkness and countless
teammate
bright
of the
colors.
patrol squad.
At that moment,
But after
he
this
suddenly became
exploration of the
clear-headed.
fallen
He
creator's
felt as if
half-destroyed
something had
temple.
ingeniously caught
He had
him
become
in that
reserved
state of
and
reverie.
merely smiled
He saw
at
the
everyone.
flickering yellow
Once he
candlelight
recalled Dark
and
Regency's
A-Floor sitting
changes,
across him with her
Derek
pale
couldn't help
gold
but
vertical
quiver
pupils.
as he felt a
In
chill
a
down
corner
his
shadow,
spine.
a grizzled
Why did he
chief,
suddenly come
Elder
looking for
Colin
me?
Iliad walked
Shouldn't
out
he be heading
after
home
nodding
after
to the
being
chief.
removed from
A-Floor
quarantine?
asked Derek.
At that moment,
"What have you been
many
doing all
questions
this
arose
time?"
in Derek's
Derek
mind.
remembered his
Suddenly,
training
he thought of a
and maintained
possibility.
the same state of
Elder
mind as
Lovia
before.
knows that I've
"I
suspected
don't know.
that something
I've
abnormal
always been
had
in a
happened to
daze
them.
as if I was in
So
a
she
dream.
sent Dark to deal
Only
with me?
occasionally will I have
Derek was
clearness
first
of mind
shocked
and filled
at
with
the
horror.
same time as his
But
reply.
immediately following
Two
that,
complex
he
dark
felt
green
that it might
symbols
not be a
appeared
bad
in
thing.
Demon Hunter Colin's
Mr.
eyes.
Hangman said.
A-Floor continued.
"If there isn't a suitable
Do you know
audience
that you had
to
a
testify
conflict
for
with
you,
Dark Regents?
then you might as
I
well
only
use
remember
the
that we
Beyonder
were
who's
fighting.
monitoring you."
I felt like I had
And
seen
now
a
the
man
person
hanging
monitoring
upside
me
down
is
on
in
a
that
cross,
corner,
and
if
a
Dark
man in
were
a
to
pointed
suddenly
hat
attack me
and a crystal
then
monocle,
he would definitely
yes, I
expose
saw
the
him
fact
back
that
at the
there's
dungeon.
something wrong with
He
him.
had opened his
This
mouth
way,
and spoke with a
even
smile.
if I don't use Mr.
Derek
World's
told a
item,
long story.
I can still
A-Floor
make things
looked
go
at the chief
smoothly.
impressed.
Derek
What
turned
did
his
he
head
say?
to look out the window.
I can't remember.
At that moment,
I can only remember
the frequency
one
of the
thing.
lightning
He
had
said
dropped
with a
to its
smile.
nadir. Fallen
Only
creator,
after a
true
minute or
creator,
two would a bolt
Shepherd,
of lightning streak across
Derek
the sky,
almost failed to control
illuminating
his
half the
excitement.
sky.
He had
The
taken
entire
such a
world,
risk,
just
and
to
most
tell
of
the
the
chief
city
the
of
name of the
Silver
fallen
was
creator,
immersed in a
and
deep
that a shepherd
darkness
was
most of the
suspicious.
time.
The
If he
fallen
were alone,
creator, similar.
The
Derek
true
wouldn't
creator.
have searched for a
It
candle
matches
to
with
light.
the content
He
on
liked
the
to lie
murals at the
quietly
bottom
in
of
bed
the temple
and think about all sorts
Colin
of
nodded
things.
slightly and
Of
whispered
course,
with a
he
frown,
knew that this was
"Shepherd."
actually rather
And then,
dangerous.
if there was no light to dispel the darkness,
Derek
then
answered
monsters
in
could
his
suddenly
stupor.
appear.
After that,
Even
they
within the
clashed,
city of
and
silver,
there was a lot of light.
However,
Very bright
Derek
lights.
was a light suppliant
Then
himself.
I woke up and kept
so he
coughing.
came equipped with the
The
attribute
dark
of
green
light
symbols in
and
Colin's
wasn't
eyes
afraid of
didn't
something
fade this
similar
entire
happening.
time. As he
Knock,
motioned for
knock,
Evelyn to ask
knock.
about the details.
Dark knocked 3
Derek
more
answered
times,
selectively,
as if urging the
and he
master
had
of the
pushed
house
the blame
to open
onto
the
a
door.
man according to
He
his
wasn't
script.
like that before.
He claimed
He was
amnesia
very
on
polite.
anything that went
Derek
beyond
suddenly
that.
felt a deep
Finally,
sense of sorrow.
A4 asked,
He took out a
"Where did
candle
you get
from
the
a wooden
axe?
box.
Where did you
and
get
placed
the
it
sun
in the middle
pathways
of the
potion
table?
formula?"
He then rubbed his
I bought the
fingers,
axe
creating
from
an
an underground
underground
flame.
market. The
That
flame lit
person
the
was
candle,
masked,
filling
and
the
I could
room
only
with a
tell that
faint
he
but
was
warm
male.
glow. The
And
sun
this was
pathway
accompanied
potion
by a
formula
faint
was left to
pungent
me by
aroma.
my parents.
The candles in the city of silver They had
mainly
discovered
made
it
from
during
the
an
fat and
expedition
oil refined from the
Derek
bodies
answered
of monsters.
confidently. They would
These
have
were
different
points of
smells due to
suspicion
their
that had
different
always
origins.
been there.
After
So the
taking a
hangman
deep
had
breath,
assumed they were bound
Derek
to ask
walked to
them
the
while
door
he
with
was
a strong
questioned.
sense of vigilance
Therefore,
and opened
he had
it.
made Derek to
What took you so
repeatedly
long?
rehearse the answers.
Dark asked with a
Although
smile.
the city of Silver's underground market
I was looking for
semi-open,
candles.
Derek
There were
replied.
still people who
He didn't
tried
dare
to
to
conceal
leave
their
his back to the
identities
other party
for a variety
and
of
he
reasons.
chose to walk side
This
by side
provided
with
the
Dark,
best explanation
with his
for
classmate
Derek.
and teammate.
After
He
Aflor
walked back
finished
to the
seriously
table
listening
and
to
took
him,
their respective
she turned her
seats.
head sideways.
Do you want to try
Demon
some
Hunter
of these
Colin
recently
and said,
dried doom fruits?
"He's not lying."
Dark asked
There's no
with a
way he
smile,
can lie.
as he
I'm
removed
using
a
the
small
powers
cloth
of glory
bag from
crown.
his waist.
Colin nodded
Doom
his head
fruits
and
were
said,
one of the very
"In
rare
this
snacks
state,
in the
he
city
doesn't
of
show
Silver.
any traces
It
of
came from a
evil,
plant called the
degeneration,
doom
or
blood
corruption.
vine, a type of
Discovering
organism
these
that
traits
didn't
was
need
the
light to
special
grow.
ability of a
It
demon
grew by
hunter.
absorbing the
As a
nutrients
high-sequence
from rotten
job,
corpses.
Demon
It had a
hunters were the
tendency
best
to
at
attack
concealing their
and
movements
was considered
and
quite a
intentions,
common weak
making it
monster.
impossible
Every
for them
doom
to be
blood vine
detected
had
by
many
targets who
thumb-sized
could
black
foretell
fruits,
danger,
which could be
Therefore,
eaten directly.
every demon
They were
hunter was a
crispy and
devil's
sweet,
nemesis,
but they were
After
unable
some
to
thought,
fill one's
Colin
stomach
got up and left the
didn't
room.
provide the
He
necessary
said to the shadow in the corner outside,
They could only be used as a daily snack
later.
The merit
I think he's
points
fine for the
received
time
from a
being.
single patrol
However,
could be exchanged
secretly
for
monitor
several
him for
large
a while.
bags of them.
If Amon is
there's
able
no
to
need.
produce 2 avatars,
Derek shook his head
he might
cautiously.
be able to create a
All right
third.
then.
Yes,
Dark poured
Chief.
out a pile of
The shadow
black fruit
responded
from the bag,
respectfully,
picked one
After
up,
Derek
and
woke
popped
up.
it into his
The
mouth
interrogation
before noisily
chamber was
munching on
empty.
it. With
Derek
only
thought
words
for a moment
informing him
and
that
took
he
the
was
initiative
free
to
to
ask.
He
Did you
secretly
encounter
heaved a
any
sigh of
monsters
relief
in the
as he began
underground
walking
area
out
of the temple?
While doing
Dark
so,
stopped
he
chewing
thought
and
of Mr.
answered with a
Hangman's
smile.
advice. There were quite
You
a
can't
few
relax
of them, just like
but
that,
they weren't
and
that
end up
powerful.
careless. They were
The secret
easily
surveillance
eliminated
will
by
definitely
us.
continue
That
for
place
some
was
time.
destroyed for a long
Otherwise,
time.
your chief
So the
is
powerful
lacking.
monsters
Yes,
probably left a long
I can't
time
even
ago.
recite the honorific
He paused
name
for
of
a
Mr.
second.
Fool anymore
Then
for
he
the
said
time
with
being.
the corners of his
Derek
mouth
muttered
curled
to himself
We
as
found
he
some
walked down
strange
the
plants
spiral
at the bottom of the
staircase.
temple.
As he was
They looked
walking,
like mushrooms
he
in the
suddenly
general
saw a
knowledge
familiar
class.
figure dressed
They
in
were
a purple
especially
striped
bright
black robe
and looked very
It was
appetizing.
the beautiful shepherd elder
It's been
Lovia.
confirmed that they're
Her
edible.
pale gray eyes
They can
swept
bring
over
about an
Derek,
enhancement
and
in
a gentle
one's
smile
spirituality
appeared on her
and
face.
strengthen one's body.
Back in her room,
If it's combined
with an
with
indifferent
roasted
expression,
monsters, then
Lovia
it will emit
walked to
an
the desk
unimaginable
and
fragrance.
unfolded a piece of
As he
parchment
said
that was made from
he
leather.
took out a
Her
palm-sized
left hand
mushroom-shaped
pinched the
object
index
from
finger
another
of her
small
right
cloth
hand
bag
and
the
snapped
stem
the
was
tip of her
milky
finger.
white, and the
However,
cap was
not
bright
a single
crystal
drop
and
of
red.
blood dripped.
It was also
It was
dotted
as if
with
her
dark
blood
golden
had been
spots.
gathered onto the
mere
surface
sight
of
of
her
the plant
finger.
made Derek
With this
gulp a
finger,
mouthful of saliva.
she drew a complex
as though he
symbol
had
on
been
the piece
starving
of
for
paper.
days. It was
Under
made up
the
of a
illumination
pupilless
of the dim
eye which
candlelight,
represented secrecy,
the beautiful
and the
mushroom-shaped
contorted
object
lines which
had an
represented
alluring luster
change. That whet
After
his
careful
appetite
examination,
in an irresistible
she
fashion.
wrapped the finger with
Here's
this
one
piece
for
of
you.
paper.
Dark
Stuffed
smiled
it into
warmly
her mouth.
and bit on it noisily
Derek
before
almost took
swallowing
action
it all.
immediately as
With
he
only
picked up
4
the
fingers
mushroom-shaped
left,
plant to
flesh
stuff it
and
into
blood
his
suddenly
mouth.
squirmed
But
around
in
the
the
wound
end,
on her
he
right
forced
palm.
himself to open his mouth and say,
It quickly
give it
grew
a try
into
tomorrow.
a new index finger. Dark
One
didn't
that
say
looked
anything
slightly
else.
pale.
He pushed
She
the
lowered
mushroom
her
in
head,
front of
looked
Derek,
at her palm,
and continued
and
to
whispered
eat
her
his doom
phrase,
fruits.
"The fool."
With great difficulty, Derek moved his gaze away
Chapter
from the
401,
mushroom and
Divine
asked,
Epiphany Backlund.
Did you make any discoveries on
basement
this
that resembled
expedition?
a temple?
Yes.
Mr.
Dark
A,
paused his
dressed
snack
in a
eating
hooded
and
black
held a
robe,
black doom fruit,
motionlessly
replying
quietly
knelt
knelt
in
in
front of a
seriously.
figurine of the
We
hanged
found a
giant
lot of murals
for an extended
a continuous
period of time.
series of murals.
Suddenly,
Do you
he
remember
pricked
that
up his
statue in
ears
the temple?
as if he was listening to
Yes.
something.
Derek
After
shot
a
a short
glance at the
pause,
mushroom and nodded.
Mr. A's
A
hands
huge
jerked
cross
up,
with a naked
and he
man
snapped
nailed
his
to
right
it while
index
hanging
finger
upside
with his
down.
left palm,
and its
He
surface
stuffed the
was
bloody
deliberately
finger into his
smeared
mouth
with a lot of
and
blood.
munched on it like he
Dark
was eating
fiddled with the
snacks,
doom fruit in
making
his hand
crunching
and
sounds.
said,
Gulp.
The newly discovered
Mr. A's
murals
throat
tell us
wiggled,
that the builders
and
of
he
the
swallowed
temple
his
believed
gnawed fingers
that the
into his
statue
stomach.
represented the
His
Lord
body
who
suddenly
created
trembled,
everything.
as if
The
he was being
omnipotent
grabbed
and
and
omniscient
shaken
by an
God.
invisible
They
figure.
believed that the Lord
In
didn't didn't abandon this land. Mr. A stretched out his right hand us shoulder the vast majority of our sins to write words on the ground. Those words were written from an upright position to upside down, which could stir the powers of nature, to being nailed to the cross, nor was it in Hermes, which was used for sacrificial rituals. God's grace knows no bounds. Instead, we are not the abandoned, the most ordinary and commonplace language chosen ones. The scarlet color quickly gathered together and shedding blood in our stead. Pieced together the city of silver would have been destroyed long ago. The fool that would have long ceased to exist. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. In the lone kingdom where yellow and black who wields good luck, justice, adores and the others are located. There are no curses, end of the divine epiphany, darkness, no monsters lurking in darkness, and a new finger grew out of his squirming beloved. He lowered his head and carefully read the words he had just written. The
Then we
corners
just
of
need
his
to
mouth
change the
curled up in
symbols
the
and the
shadows.
corresponding
By your
honorific
divine
name during a
revelation,
ritual.
Mr.
And we can
humbly
receive the
prostrated,
Lord's response
as
again,
though he had found the meaning
Dark
of his
went on,
existence once
describing
again.
the murals under
City
the
of
temple,
silver,
at
and
the top
speaking
of
of
his
spire,
speculations.
Lovia walked
As
to
this
the
went
window
on,
and looked
Derek
down at
found
the
it
candlelight in the
increasingly difficult
darkness,
to resist
her
the
expression
temptation of the
softening.
mushroom.
After an unknown
No, I
period of
mustn't eat
time,
it.
she
If
heard
I
a knock
eat
at the
it,
door.
I might end
Your
up like
Excellency,
Dark and the others.
Lovia turned
completely
around with
corrupted
alacrity
by the fallen
and greeted
creator,
the visitor with
and
a
become
smile.
a fanatical
The
believer.
door opened backward
Even if
automatically.
there's someone monitoring
The person
me,
standing
they wouldn't
outside
notice
was
anything
none other
amiss.
than demon hunter
Derek
Colin
felt a
Elliot.
surge of horror.
He was draped
that
with
he
a
had
brown
to do
coat
something to
and a
extricate
leather belt
himself
with
from the
secret
situation.
compartments around his
Chase
waist.
Dark away and return
Lovia,
the mushroom
the
to him.
abnormality of the
However,
exploratory
this is
team has been
equivalent to
verified.
giving up on this
Colin
opportunity.
described plainly.
Opportunity.
As captain,
Derek's gaze
regardless of
automatically
your
fell on the
condition,
yellow candle
you have
flame
to stay in the
that was
dungeon
burning
for 3
quietly.
days
And
I'll get you a
undergo
glass
the glory
of water.
crown's cleansing.
He quickly went
should
through
know
the plan
that this
he
is
had
the
discussed
rule.
with Mr. Hangman
Lovia didn't show
and
the
calmly
slightest
stood
hint
up.
of anger.
Dark
as she
nodded
calmly
as he
threw the
smiled.
black
I
thumb-sized
know.
doom fruit
I've already
into his
made
mouth,
preparations
munching
to
at
stay
it
in the
noisily
dungeon
for a long
while
time.
Derek poured the
When
water.
it's over, he
I can
deliberately
accept
slowed
any
down his
arrangements,
actions,
even if you
lowered
guys
his
still
head,
don't trust me,
and recited the
as she
honorific
spoke.
name of Mr.
She had
Fool.
walked to the door.
Finally, he
and
said,
went past Demon
"Your
Hunter
devoted
Colin
servant
while
prays
facing
for
him.
your attention.
Colin turned
I
silently
pray for you to
and
take his
followed
offer
her
down the
ranks.
winding steps.
I pray for you to
Halfway
open the
there,
gates to your
they
kingdom."
heard heart-wrenching cries and shouts.
Is it
A
starting
strong
again?
gust of wind blew up
Lovia
inside
asked
the
with
room
a
as the
slightly
power of
confused
nature
expression
generated under the incantation's
Colin
influence
nodded and
formed
replied in a
clear
low
waves.
voice.
At
Yes,
the same
this is a
time,
destiny
Dark,
that
who
we
had
can't
just picked
escape
up
from.
a black doom fruit
At this moment,
suddenly
in a
raised
large
his head
hall
and
in
looked
the
at
middle
Derek,
levels of the
who was
spire.
facing him
The
from
members
side.
of the exploratory
What happened?
team,
Without
and the few
answering
residents
him,
of the city of
Derek
Silver,
held one hand
who had
over
been
the axe of
corrupted, were pressed
hurricane
down to the
and stuffed
ground
the
by
other into
seemingly
a secret
corporeal
pocket,
holy lusters.
removing the wall
They were
of
unable to
spirituality
move,
on the
as though
exterior
they
of
were
the
carrying
iron
a
box.
huge mountain on
Derek
their backs.
cast an exceptionally
A couple
guarded
in their
gaze
40s
at Dark,
with dark skin,
only to see
held
the
a sword
expression
with
of his
complicated
classmate
patterns
and teammate
as they
darken,
walked up to
as
a young
bright red
man in
traces
his
appeared
early
in his
20s.
blue eyes.
The young man's
In
body
his
had
hand,
already turned
the doom
into a
fruit
meat slush,
strangely shed its
but
outer
his head was
darkness
still intact
and transformed
only
into
a long,
seemingly
thin,
blood-red
blood-red
tendril
tendril
grew
grew
out of it.
It wasn't
Seeing
a doom
the couple
fruit,
approaching,
but
he
a
shouted
finger,
in
a
horror.
bloody finger.
A
Dad,
human
Mom,
finger.
what are you doing?
The pile
Didn't
of
we
doom
agree
fruits
to
on
eat
the
grilled
table were
iron scorpions
comprised
together
of human
tonight?
fingers.
Dad,
The brightly
Mom,
colored
I
mushroom
caught a lot of
had
iron
also
scorpions
changed its
for you.
appearance. The
It
couple
was no
couldn't bear
longer
it
as
any
beautiful,
longer and turned
and
their
it no
heads
longer
to the
flowed
side
with an
but they
appetizing
raised
luster.
the sword in their hands
It was a
high into the
blood-stained
air.
scalp with short
After
black
2
hair.
stabbing sounds
Staring
rang
at
out,
Derek,
the young
Dark
man
opened his
stopped
mouth,
his wailing,
his voice
he
cold
twitched
and adrift.
first. Then
What
he
were you
completely
doing?
lost all signs of
Backlund,
life.
15 Minsk
Elsewhere, a
Street.
young girl,
As soon as
who was
Klein,
around 10
who
years
had
old,
crawled into the warm
raised a
world
sword
under
with
his quilt,
complicated patterns
heard
on
what
it.
sounded like a
Tears
prayer
were
from
streaming
little
down
son.
her face.
He struggled to get out of bed.
Sister
and conjured
the
a
girl
wall
lying
of
on the ground
spirituality.
suddenly laughed
He then
and
took
gently
4
said,
steps counterclockwise
"From today onwards,
and went above the gray
you'll have
fog.
to live your own life,
Seated in the seat
Don't
that
be
belonged
naive
to the
anymore."
fool.
The
He
girl
didn't hurry
immediately
to
cried
examine
until
little
her
son's
vision
request.
turned into a blur.
Instead,
and the sword
he
in
made
her
the Dark
hand
Emperor
stopped in
card.
midair. Paper
However,
figurines,
a strong palm
and other
pressed the
items
back of
appear
her
in
hand,
front of him
pushing
on the
it
long
forward.
bronze table.
Oof.
In a neatly
The girl
arranged
was left
order.
stunned,
According
as
to
though
the
she
hanged
couldn't
man's
hear or
plan,
see anything.
the scene
This
of the
was the
sun
ancient
stimulating
curse
that
that
everyone
everyone
in the city of Silver was under.
member.
They had
would
to kill
happen
their
during
own
a
blood
sacrificial
relatives
ritual.
to prevent them
That
from
way,
turning into
when the matter was
terrifying and
concluded,
strange evil
it would be
spirits
quite
after
simple
their
to
deaths.
make the object,
Therefore,
that was borrowed
even though
from the
Dark
world,
had completely
disappear
mutated
from the
into a
scene,
monster, wiping
and was
away all the
corrupted by an
evidence.
unknown existence.
After that, having
all
no
the blame
value
could
in
be pushed
interrogating
onto Amon.
the shadow
As for
observer
Mr.
didn't
Fool,
dare to kill
Klein
him
had
on the
agreed
spot.
to little son's
Instead,
request to
he tried
simplify
his
the
best
ritual
to restrain
in
the
an uncaring
monster
manner
and bring
all
it
that
back
was
to
needed
the
to be
spire
done
to
were
wait
the
for
key
his
steps.
parents. At
Otherwise,
this point, the
he was waiting
situation
for
would
the
only
prelude
become
to the
worse.
ritual to be
The
completed,
exploratory team
so that he
members
could
were currently
respond.
receiving the same treatment that they had been subjected to. Chapter
a process that
399,
remained
the
unchanging
corrupted
for more than 2,000 in the city of Silver. Although no one knew if they would mutate after dying in this state, Derek suddenly recalled what it previously looked like. Fortunately, it was a beautiful and alluring mushroom. Silver didn't have a large one that he almost couldn't control himself all of them from lived swallowing. In the same area. The doom fruits, under the arrangements of the upper echelons for each generation, crunchy there were sounds when they were bitten who were related to each other by blood, bloody pieces even if they were limited by 3 generations. At that moment, be able to find Derek had a violent spasm in his stomach before a gush of acid surged to his throat. The Beyonder in charge of setting up a patrol team, he quickly croaked the line of lyrics. To consider the matter of blood ties. Please have your kingdom descend upon this land. Unexpected situations your enemies will disperse. The requirements for exploratory teams weren't that strict. There was a touch of missions were always to invade deep into the darkness, and Derek felt all the discomfort far away from the city of Silver. His spirituality also became full and lively. It wouldn't affect everyone's safety. His strength, once a resident, no longer all greatly enhanced within 3 generations. That was the beyond their powers of under strict surveillance. Dark stared at his former classmate and teammate, visibly aged, singing with an increasingly dark expression. Into the depths of darkness. The way he spoke became away more and more inhuman. What is that thing on your body? Of the exploratory team, on your body? Uddle was isolated in the dungeon. There were actually 3 elders in the clothes were stretched out in bugling strips. The one who took action as though a nest of slithering venomous snakes was underneath them. Otherwise, they could only attempt to seal. Bloody strips of flesh pierced through the elder brother of his direct kin, and its surface had rough skin and demon hunter Colin silently entered the bottom level of the spire. Causing Dark to look like a bloody furry hedgehog. They arrived at the depths of the dungeon. The meat strands surged towards both Derek, of them stopped outside his cell. Standing at his original location. Dispersed themselves Derek was a patrol squad member without any quite a number of monsters. She walked into a room with a single bed, by this situation. And he twisted his waist, at a moderate raised his arm before the metal door closed. The axe of Hurricane that he turned around holding in his hand, and looked at Demon Hunter Colin with her pale gray eyes. The axe of Hurricane hacked down Your at a few bloody strands of flesh. You once told me that when residents of the city of Silver leave and causing them to fall to the ground in the depths of the darkness. However, because it was nighttime in the city of Silver, into evil spirits. This strike didn't bring about any lightning. Even more bloody strips of flesh began to surge forward. Wrapping themselves around the axe of Hurricane over and over again, Colin nodded and expressed his agreement. Seeing that his weapon couldn't be pulled back, revealing a sad smile. A pure light suddenly lit up in Derek's eyes. 2 months ago, it was as if 2 small sons had descended into the room. I pretended to be separated from the rest of the team. Something close to his mouth. I waited there for 5 days, as if he was praying, but he didn't turn into an evil spirit. A fiery pillar of Demon Hunter Colin looked at her in silence, striking the bloody flesh that was wound up into a ball. Closed with a clang. Dark let out an uncontrollable scream. And the ancient strips of flesh fell to the ground. After waiting for a while, they squirmed, was finally struggling as if they were alive. That there were no changes to the crimson star, which symbolized little Sunday. These bloody strips he should have succeeded. Was no longer under the control of its original owner. His spirituality and gradually, his body, they merged with the natural power derived from the sacrificial rituals. As soon as he felt the presence of his body, forming an increasingly bright bitter cold wave, he sneezed. This wave, then he quickly removed the wall of spirituality. Causing the light to suddenly burgeon. Sadly, forming an bed was already ice mysterious door. Fortunately, Derek had long drawn the fool's a certain symbol on the candle after this was all prepared in advance. Otherwise, all of this constituted a simple but complete sacrifice ceremony. Klein wrapped himself tightly with his blanket and shattered. Dark lunged at Derek while flailing the bloody strips of meat. Reminded him of a joke. There was no fear or tension in his previous life. Only the purest, basically gained by vibration. At this moment, his bed warmed up again. Who was above the fog, he could only let his mind wander with a creaking sound. As he thought about all the illusory door that had many strange patterns on it opened a tiny for me recently. Behind the magician's rules have been concluded, in which countless even if I don't challenge the impossible shadows resided, and only engage in high above these shadows were 7 pure lights of different colors that contained endless knowledge. My next task is to collect the beyond ingredients for the faceless potion, and above it was an ancient palace that overlooked the gray fog. But that's not something I can rush. A shadow leaped out from a dark Klein's mind gradually softened, who was closest to him, and he suddenly had the thought of resting for 2 to 3 days. Were all wrapped up as the bed warmed. He fell asleep without realizing it. Turn into a cat. When he woke up, who had entered he heard the church bells ringing 8 times. The shadow didn't stop. Klein stretched out his arm, extended across the ground, and silently withdrew it. Who had already dodged to colder again today, and shouted, "There's nothing pertinent to do. What are you trying to do? Continue sleeping as an observer. Relax." His original plan was to watch from the sidelines, but after a while, and record the corresponding anomalies, and felt the bulge in his lower abdomen to stop the 2 strange parties hard choices. When the situation became unmanageable. After 10 minutes or so of struggling door covered with strange symbols, he finally gave up, got up. He felt intimidated to the bathroom next door. Mysterious, after changing his clothes and washing up. He went down to the first floor that this was related to a terrifying evil god, noodles. So he could only take hasty action. He didn't intend to use orders in an attempt to forcefully interrupt Derek's attempt. He wanted to try performing a sacrifice to that 2 days ago. However, this was the meat Derek had already chosen his location to be as far from the shadow as possible. Although there were ultimately differences in the who was possessed by the mysterious Amon, preventing the shadow observer had to bypass the authentic or take down Derek Regents Klein first. Still found it pretty However, good his choice was the latter. It wasn't because of the obvious he had a bowl of Potter noodles with leaving condiments back to this paste. Was an he found it a really wonderful morning. Taking advantage of the tradition of this world, Derek took out the iron box from his concealed pocket, and he checked if Eye of Wisdom had placed an advertisement by the candle flame. Based on his late-night thoughts from yesterday, presented a magical Klein decided to have some fun today. As the iron box disappeared, so he considered whether he should go to a concert, symbols and characteristics, or a play, closed with a clang to many of the music halls in the West Borough, Hillston Borough, and Sherwood Borough, are at least 6 solely. And if it's a famous musician, then they would even be on the order of pounds. Music halls specially catered to common folk range from 6 to 9 pence. Those that are open to the poor with money, to spare in East Borough, only need 1 pence. Klein flipped through the relevant materials to select his choice of entertainment for the day. At that moment, he heard the doorbell ring. Ding dong. Chapter 402. Digging. Who is it? Klein jerked his head up to look at the door. He felt as if he were suffering from an illness. The fear of hearing the doorbell ring was identical to the symptoms he had experienced on Earth, being afraid of his cell phone's ringing. Putting down the newspaper and magazine, he looked at the empty plate, which had been cleaned even of its seasonings. Then he stood up, and he walked to the door. Before he got a hold of the handle, he already knew that it was Dr. Aaron outside. "Don't you need to work?" Klein mumbled as he opened the door. "Good morning, Aaron. The fog is gray today." He smiled. Aaron was still wearing his cold expression, but there was an additional sense of anxiety and fear written on his face. He nudged his gold-rimmed spectacles and, without bothering to greet him, bluntly said, "Sherlock, I had another dream. I dreamed of Will Accepton again." "Ah." Klein almost froze. "That's not right. The real paper crane is with me, above the gray fog, while the one I folded is with the nighthawks. You're still able to dream of Will Accepton with a paper crane, which was poorly folded by a nighthawk? That's not scientific, no. That's not mystic." Klein became serious and asked, "The same dream?" "No, it's not that scary this time." Aaron became a little calmer. "I dreamed about the grim cemetery. You know of it, right?" "Yes," Klein answered simply. Back then, he had caught a group of students and a mysticism enthusiast, who was a complete beginner, Kapusky, engaging in a spiritual dance outside Grim Cemetery. He later received another copper whistle from the latter, which could be used to summon a messenger. Aaron drew a deep breath of cold air and continued. "I dreamed of the woods outside Grim Cemetery. I dreamed of a birch tree, which had a layer of bark peeled off its trunk. Will Accepton was sitting underneath that tree, looking at me quietly. And then," Klein pressed. Aaron shook his head. "The dream ended there. What a strange matter. Has Dr. Aaron's dream got nothing to do with the paper crane?" "No. If it wasn't related, then there wouldn't have been a situation where the dream changed after the paper crane was switched. Furthermore, I also performed a divination using the paper crane above the gray fog and obtained the corresponding revelations," Klein said in a measured voice. "This is no longer within my scope of understanding. What do you want from me, Aaron?" Aaron breathed out warm air that dispersed into white mist. "I want to pay a visit to the area outside Grim Cemetery. I want to do it now, while it's still daytime. Can you protect me? I'll pay you £1. Heading over to the place that appeared in the dream now, he probably wouldn't encounter anything too strange during the day. Klein thought for a moment and said, "I can accept this request, but I suggest that you go back to the same cathedral and tell your dream to the bishop you're familiar with." Aaron agreed, then said doubtfully, "Why do you always suggest that I go to the cathedral? I know you've explained it before, in a very logical way, that if mystical powers exist in this world, then the churches, which have been leading humanity, must be the ones with the strongest mystical powers. And if there are none, then at least we can go to the church to get psychological comfort and corresponding connections. However, why do you suggest that I go to the cathedral for something that isn't considered too strange?" Klein considered for 2 seconds, then replied seriously, "I'm a detective. I've come into contact with a lot of unusual things, so I understand the special nature of the church. I also know when to ask for help." "Really?" Aaron listened with a serious expression. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up. "Just kidding. Take it easy, Aaron. I'm going to change my clothes first. And also do the dishes." Having chatted with Aaron at the door for a long time without his thick coat, he turned rather stiff from the cold winds. Taking this opportunity, Klein went to the washroom, went above the gray fog, and divined the degree of danger for this mission. He received the answer that there was almost no risk. If he received a revelation indicating that it was dangerous, his plan was to reject the mission, using the Church of the Evernight Goddess as an excuse. Hillstonborough Myriad Star Cathedral. Sherlock, why don't you hire a maid? As a great detective, you can afford to have several servants, Aaron asked, as he led Klein to the Church of the Evernight Goddess's largest cathedral in Hillstonborough. This was something that he had wanted to ask while in the carriage, but he had never found the opportunity to change the subject. Klein sighed and said heavily, Aaron, let me tell you a story. There was a detective who hired 2 maids, a cook, and an assistant, and he was doing pretty well. But one day he took over a case and successfully homed in on the murderer, who was a very savage and cruel man. He sneaked into the detective's house with the intention of revenge. The detective was a fighting expert, and in the end, he was only slightly injured, but 2 of his servants died because of him. Do you get it, Aaron? I see. Aaron's voice had a hint of empathy. Sherlock, I never knew that you've had such an experience. No, the main character has nothing to do with me. I just made up a story. It's not like I can tell you directly that I'm involved in many strange and mystical matters, and that there will always be unspeakable secrets in my house, so that it's best I don't hire any servants. Klein looked forward and let out a long sigh. The cleaning of his home was done twice a week, mostly by Mrs. Stellan Sammer's maid. She was responsible for the most basic cleaning procedures, and each cleaning cost 1 solely. While they were talking, the 2 of them had already entered the hall of the Myriad Star Cathedral. It was dark, quiet, and devoid of candles, completely in line with the Church of the Evernight Goddess's style. At the very front of the hall was an altar engraved with a dark sacred emblem. The stars were inlaid with self-illuminating pearls, and the crimson moon was made of rubies. The rest of the hall was filled with the darkness of the night. With a single glance, he could see that the place was filled with specks of light, as the crimson light illuminated the area, making the place extremely sacred. But Klein felt that this was inferior to the design used by St. Selena Cathedral in Tingen. That hall was pitch black, with only light penetrating from the front through the fist-sized holes. It resembled a star sky, making one feel awe from the bottom of one's heart. However, there's a problem with that kind of design. At night, the effect would be gone. Klein took a seat at random, took off his half-top hat, and leaned on his black hardwood cane, while Aaron continued down the aisle to the confessional in search of the bishop. Sitting in such a large hall, and looking at the people who were concentrating on praying, Klein's heart suddenly became tranquil. Come to think of it, this is only my 3rd time entering the goddess's cathedral. He let out a self-deprecating laugh. Inside the Cathedral of Serenity at Winter County, Leonard Mitchell put on his black windbreaker and red gloves, and entered the room of the high-ranking deacon, Christet Casimir. Congratulations, you have officially become a red glove. May the goddess bless you. Casimir drew a crimson moon on his chest. He still had his mouth covered with his high collar. Praise the lady. The honor is mine. Leonard raised his right hand, and gestured 4 points in a clockwise fashion. Casimir didn't say anything else, and went straight to the point. According to your request, I've placed you in Soas' team. He's a soul assurer, and possesses a mystical item. I've already ordered someone to prepare a beyonder weapon for you that you'll need. Your team will be in charge of a devil summoning case, and you'll take into consideration certain clues to perform the search. For example, cases that have happened consecutively in Backlund, and matters related to a tarot ritual. Yes, Reverend Casimir. Leonard held no objections towards the mission. This will be the beginning of my revenge, he silently said to himself. Westborough, in the periphery of Grim Cemetery. Klein accompanied Dr. Aaron, as they took quite a while to walk around the nearby woods, coughing from time to time as a result of the falling grayish-white dust. Maybe there isn't a tree like that. Dreams can't fully reflect reality. Towards the end of the search, even Aaron was feeling a little uncertain himself. Fortunately, I'm good at finding things. Klein pointed with his cane and said, Let's take a look over there and make it our final effort. All right. Aaron gasped for a breath of air. After a short walk, Aaron suddenly stopped and said, while pointing diagonally ahead, over there, over there. About a dozen meters away, a birch tree with a strip of bark around its trunk stripped off stood there quietly, as if it were waiting for them. It's identical to the one in my dream, Aaron said with conviction. Klein smiled and said with some vigilance, but there's no Wuxia. Aaron got close to the birch tree, frowned for a while, then he suddenly pointed to the side of the tree and said, back then, Wuxia was sitting here, and he was pointing at the mud below him with his finger. Pointing at the mud below him? Klein stood at the side, looking down at the almost unwithered grass. You want to dig it up? Aaron nodded. We've already found this place, so we should confirm what's here. Sherlock, go to the cemetery and borrow 2 shovels. It's better if I stay here. You go to the cemetery. I'm worried something might happen to you, Klein said cautiously. All right. Aaron didn't refuse, and he immediately left the forest. After a while, after offering some money, he returned with 3 shovels and a tombkeeper, and they began to dig. While Klein was digging, he suddenly smelled something familiar. As the soil on the surface parted, the things below were gradually exposed. It was the body of a child that was already greatly rotten. His skin and flesh looked as if they were about to melt, and many bugs crawled in and out of his nose and mouth. Clang! The shovel fell from Aaron's hand and hit a rock. He pointed to the legs of the corpse, his mouth moving frantically, but he was unable to say a word. Klein endured the nausea and looked closely, discovering that the child's left leg was obviously missing its lower half. At the same time, Aaron took 2 steps back and fell to the ground, shouting sharply, Wuxia! Wuxia! It was Wuxia's corpse. Chapter 403. The fate of a private detective. He's dead? Wuxia is dead? And he seems to have been dead for some time. Could this be fake? Klein looked at the body of the child in surprise and suspicion, as many thoughts bubbled in his mind. From what he knew, Wuxia was a special child, who could be involved with a sequence one of the monster pathway, Snake of Mercury, in some way. In the divination game he played, a casual doctor, your luck will get worse, was enough to make Aaron suffer from bad luck for an extended period of time. The paper crane he folded allowed Aaron's astral projection to be located in the spirit world and be instilled with artificial revelations. Even above the gray fog, Klein only received an inkling of his location and couldn't come to an effective conclusion. How could such a child die for no reason? He was dead before Dr. Aaron's dreams? What about his family? Klein narrowed his eyes, and despite his intense nausea, he carefully examined the highly rotten body. He noticed some torn tarot cards in the surrounding soil. His spiritual intuition told him that the corpse in front of him was most likely Wuxia. It's really shocking and difficult to understand. I should go above the gray fog later and confirm if it's a fake death from Wuxia. Wait, what does this have to do with me? I had already decided not to get involved in this matter any further, in case I get entangled by some Snake of Mercury. This might be even more terrifying than sealed artifact 0-08. Klein snapped out of his daze and said to the terrified tombkeeper and Dr. Aaron, who was on the verge of a mental breakdown, call the police. Okay. The tombkeeper was taken aback at first before he repeated his reply. With the shovel in hand, he turned and ran out of the woods, at a speed that was so fast that it appeared as though he was being chased by a zombie. As expected, he's just an ordinary person, and isn't cautious at all. In this kind of situation, shouldn't he be wary of the people around him, who might have malicious intent? By exposing your back, it would be easy for you to be hit by a shovel. Klein glanced at the back of the tombkeeper, and shook his head with a sigh. When he was a nighthawk in Tingen, he had read a lot of case files, and found out that many of the victims had ended up becoming victims of their companions. Thinking of this, Klein walked to Dr. Aaron, bent down, and stretched out his hand. There's nothing to be afraid of. He's already dead. It's the death that scares me. Aaron calmed down a bit, and without accepting Klein's help, he got up by himself. His black frock coat was covered with dirt, and Klein felt his heart pain for the clothes for some baffling reason. "I'm the kind of person who can't stand seeing anything valuable get damaged," he inwardly sighed with emotion. Noticing that Aaron was still panicking, Klein laughed and said, "At such times, praying to the deity you believe in has quite a remarkable effect." "Is that so?" Aaron was stunned. He tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner and chanted softly, "The Evernight Goddess is nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity. Your devout believer prays for your blessing." After repeating this over and over again, he gradually calmed down, no longer feeling as terrified as before. Klein drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest and silently whispered to himself, "God of steam and machinery, your completely unfaithful believer is begging for your blessings." As he spoke, he couldn't help but laugh at himself, suspecting that he might be smote to death by lightning on the spot. However, lightning and thunder belong to the Lord of Storms, and it isn't in the domain of the God of steam and machinery, Klein thought in a relaxed manner. After about 20 minutes, the two of them found themselves sitting in an interrogation room at a nearby police station. During the testimony, Klein frankly informed the police that he was a private investigator who wasn't too sure of what was happening. As for Dr. Aaron, he described his dream in detail as the reason for digging to find the body. Klein could tell that the police didn't believe him at all, but after they had gone out for a while, they immediately changed their attitudes, saying that there was nothing suspicious about Dr. Aaron and Detective Moriarty. All they had to do was sign their statements and leave. Aaron was surprised, but Klein wasn't surprised. It was obvious that the Nighthawks had been involved. The advantage of having the doctor head to the Myriad Star Cathedral in advance was demonstrated. Before leaving the police station, Klein wasn't surprised to see a familiar figure. It was the Nighthawk who had entered his dream earlier. The man on duty, who was probably a captain, was still wearing a gray windbreaker and was obviously more resistant to the cold than Klein. His blue eyes swept past Klein's face without any signs of abnormality, pretending to be an ordinary senior inspector. Klein, who was also pretending to be an ordinary private detective, nudged his glasses, put on half-top hat, and left the station with Dr. Aaron in a carriage. After instructing his carriage driver to head to Minsk Street first, Aaron turned to Klein and said, "Sherlock, do you think this will be the end of it? If that body really belongs to Willa Septon, then you shouldn't be troubled any longer." Klein paused and continued, "Aaron, have you found anything else that's strange during this period of time? Regardless of what it is." Aaron thought about it and shook his head. "No, this is worth celebrating." Klein sighed and said with a smile, to him, this was the best way things could end with Willa Septon's matter. Although the paper crane Klein had folded above the gray fog wouldn't reveal anything, and there would be no problems with any divination afterward, he was still a little worried that some Nighthawk would suddenly think of something and use it to find some clues. And now, with the death of Willa Septon, the case might soon reach a dead end, put in the archives, and temporarily declared a closed case. No one would pay any more attention to it without any new developments. Aaron relaxed and asked suspiciously, "Frankly, I don't think my statement was very convincing. Why did the cops choose to believe it in the end?" "I don't know either," Klein feigned puzzlement and said, "I thought I'd have to get my lawyer to take me home again. No, bail me out." Aaron smirked and said, "Sherlock, you seem to have a lot of experience in being sent to the police station?" Klein laughed and replied in a deep voice, "It's the fate of every private detective." Just as Klein and Aaron were being taken to the police station near Grimm Cemetery, Furswall was wearing a long black dress and a black bonnet with a fine mesh hanging down. She entered the silent cemetery and found the grave of Mrs. Elisa. She and Zio had gone to Empress Borough an hour ago to visit Viscount Glaint, and they had successfully gotten a verbal agreement for borrowing £400 without any interest. Viscount Glaint's only request was that the two Beyonders accompany him to the gathering Mr. A would convene tonight to ensure his safety. He was anxious to procure a royal jellyfish's venom crystal so that he could complete the concoction of the apothecary potion. Audrey had found the horn of an adult flying unicorn in the family treasury, and she had taken one out in the name of doing a biological experiment, effectively offsetting part of her debt. She also put forward an additional condition for Viscount Glaint to get the help of Duke Negan's children to confirm if the dragon specimens in the treasury had a thousand-faced hunter, and whether there were still light dots flashing inside. When the loan was settled, Furs was in no hurry to pray to Mr. Fool to close the deal as quickly as possible, because it would make Zio intuitively turn suspicious if things developed too quickly. Taking advantage of her free time, she changed her clothes and rented a horse carriage to get to Grimm Cemetery, which was located on the outskirts of Westboro. Knowing the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, Furs realized that the main ingredient that turned her into an apprentice was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Mrs. Elisa. In a way, she had inherited her powers. Therefore, she couldn't help but pay a visit and put a bouquet of flowers in front of Mrs. Elisa's grave and thank her. It was early winter, and most of the flowers had long since withered, but Furs still bought a handful of plain flowers. These flowers were grown in a greenhouse and were quite expensive. "Thank you, Emperor Roselle, for your invention," Furs said inwardly in a most sincere manner. As far as she knew, most of the flowers that the nobles used for their winter banquets came from greenhouses, while a tiny portion was delivered directly from the warm south by airships. This was more than the average middle-class worker could bear. Standing in front of the black tombstone, Furs took a deep look at the photograph of Mrs. Elisa before bending down to lay down the flowers and whispered, "Thank you." She immediately straightened up, closed her eyes, and quietly recalled the past. At this moment, she heard a slightly aged voice. "You really are a good and kind-hearted lady." Furs opened her eyes and turned her head, realizing that Mr. Lawrence, from the Abraham family, had also appeared there at some point. He was also holding a bouquet of plain but elegant flowers in his hand. "No, this is not goodness, nor is it kindness. Mrs. Elisa once gave me, a person who had lost her mother, an unforgettable period of warmth," Furs said sincerely. Her eyes were suddenly moist. Lawrence, who only had wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, put down the flowers and sighed. "This shows that you value relationships." After chatting for a while, when Furs was about to leave, Lawrence, who was waving her goodbye, suddenly began to cough violently. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed until his legs buckled and fell to the ground. It seemed as if he would die at any moment from suffocation. As a doctor who had graduated from an accredited school, Furs didn't hesitate to turn around, crouch down, and begin performing first aid. After a while, Lawrence's condition finally stabilized. He wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and smiled at Furs. "Lady, can you take me back to the hotel?" "No problem." Furs helped him to his feet. Lawrence looked ahead, his eyes a little out of focus. He coughed lightly, and he said with a sad and self-deprecating laugh, "My life might be coming to an end." Chapter 404. Entrust Westboro Carlpensa Hotel. Furs helped Lawrence into his room and laid him down on the bed. It was a rather luxurious hotel, with thick, soft, grayish-yellow carpets everywhere except the washroom. On the walls hung imitations of famous oil paintings. Lawrence gasped for air and said, "Thank you, Miss Wall, and please forgive a dying man for not being able to bow." "No, Mr. Lawrence, your problem has eased. As a former medical doctor, I can tell you without a doubt that you can still live. After some rest, we'll go to a clinic or a hospital," Furs consoled him. Lawrence smiled. "I know my physical condition very well. You don't have to comfort me. Besides, I'm an amateur astrologer. I already had a premonition that I'm going to die in this hotel in Backlund." Aside from some superficial concealment, everything he said was the truth. He was already close to 80, and he was no longer that robust and spirited young man from before. If not for the sequence potions that elevated his constitution, he might have already been buried in some random cemetery. Originally, Lawrence thought he could live for another 10 years, but who would have thought that he would encounter a rebellion caused by the former traveler Bodis? He suffered relatively serious injuries at the hands of the Aurora Order, and his remaining descendants all died in that disaster. This dealt him a great blow, and he almost didn't manage to recover from it. The search for his brothers and their descendants in Backland had only resulted in him receiving news of their deaths, dealing him a significant blow to his mental well-being once more. Compounded by all these things, Lawrence clearly felt that his life had come to an end. His initial plan was to return to the graves of Labero and Elisa again, and present a bouquet of flowers. He would then return immediately and meet with the other members of the Elder Council to set things in order before his death. But being an elderly man, his condition was beyond his control. Without waiting for a response from Furs, Lawrence struggled to retrieve a palm-sized notebook from the inside pocket of his half-open coat. The hard paper cover of the notebook was bronze green, giving off a very ancient feeling. On its surface, the words, "I came, I saw, I record" was written in ancient Fasak. Lawrence placed the notebook on the quilt in front of his chest and took a deep breath. "Mississippi Wall, if I die here, can you help me send it to Pritz Harbor?" "Mr. Lawrence, you'll be fine," Furs emphasized. At the same time, she subconsciously glanced at the notebook and found that it wasn't thick at all. There were a total of 3 types of papers inside, one of which was a yellow type of parchment which had very few pages. The other was yellowish-brown goatskin, and the number of pages was in the middle of the range. The last was comprised of ordinary white paper, and was the most common. Lawrence laughingly said with great difficulty, "I mean Mississippi Wall, will you help? Pritz Harbor isn't far. It's not even a trip. If it needs to be rushed, then I can even make the round trip in half a day by taking the steam locomotive." Furs nodded. Lawrence breathed a sigh of relief as his mind seemed to recover a little. "After I die, wait 10 minutes. Retrieve the glowing object from my body, and then send it along with this notebook to Dorian Gray at the Pritz Harbor's Fishermen Association. The 42 pounds in cash in my wallet will be the reward and my gratitude. As for these clothes of mine, let it turn to ash along with me." "No, you don't need to give me anything." "No, you'll be fine, Mr. Lawrence," Furs said earnestly. As if he hadn't heard her, Lawrence whispered to himself, "Maybe Dorian will give you additional rewards, but it depends on you. I believe you. From Elisa's matter, I can tell that you're a good girl." He suddenly seemed to turn lucid as he said to Furs, "Ms. Wall, can you go down to the first floor and bring me a jug of water? I don't know when the waiter will come over." "No problem." Without thinking, Furs took a water jug and walked out of the room. After walking a few steps, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. The water jug in her hand was heavy, and there was obviously a lot of water in it. Just as she was about to turn around and ask, she suddenly sensed a strong fluctuation of spirituality in the room. That was, for a moment Furs froze, and then she understood what Mr. Lawrence was trying to do. As death approached, he could clearly sense that something was wrong with his body. He was afraid of losing control and turning into a monster. He wanted to die as a human, not a monster, so he chose to end his own life. That was the last form of decency for a Beyonder. Of course, if he had turned into a monster, all his plans would have come to naught. With this in mind, Furs became dejected. She waited outside for nearly 10 minutes before she pushed open the door and entered. She saw Lawrence lying silently on the bed, looking like he had aged considerably. Beside him was a diamond the size of an eye. The light which shone in through the window was constantly refracted by the diamond, forming a scene as beautiful as the radiance of the stars. Furs sighed and performed a careful examination. She found that the cause of Lawrence's death was the most ordinary form of cardiac arrest. Chowood Borough, 15 Minsk Street. Klein rested for a while after getting home. He then went above the gray fog, having plans to divine the situation with Willa Septon. He had the paper crane fly out of the trash pile in the corner and made it land on the long bronze table in front of him. Then he took out the topaz pendant that was wrapped around his sleeve. As he held the spirit pendulum in his left hand, Klein used cogitation to adjust his condition before recalling the scenes he had seen in the woods outside the cemetery. He might not have noticed some of the details, but it was certain that his spirituality wouldn't miss any. This divination was mainly about using this point and relying on the gray fog to eliminate all distractions. After finishing his preparations, Klein took out a goatskin parchment and wrote the divination statement. Will Septon is completely dead. Then, he pressed the paper crane next to the divination sentence, almost causing the topaz pendant to touch the words. After entering a state of cogitation and completing all the steps of the spirit dowsing, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the result. The topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise at a fast frequency and high amplitude. It was a negative result. That meant that Will Septon wasn't completely dead. Klein was surprised, but it seemed to be within his expectations. He thought for a moment, then he changed the divination statement. That corpse was Will Septon's. This time, the spirit pendulum gave a positive result. The body did belong to Will Septon. An idea came to Klein's mind, and he wrote a new divination statement. Will Septon's corpse will resurrect. After a few moments of calmly performing the divination, Klein saw the revelation. The pendulum was rotating counterclockwise with a fast frequency. That meant that Will Septon's corpse wouldn't be resurrected. Or in other words, no reanimations. It looks like Will Septon had voluntarily, or was forced to abandon his previous body, and he is surviving in another way. This matter has something to do with the snake of Mercury. Klein tried to divine additional information, but he failed repeatedly, including the statement, Will Septon's present state. However, he repeated the divination using dream divination, and inquired, Will Septon's current location? He received a similar scene, a dark room with the sound of running water. However, the feeling it gave him seemed to be a little different. Forget it. There's no need to waste any more time on this. I'm not planning to get involved anyway. Klein put away his spirit pendulum and prepared to return to the real world. Through the prior divination and everything that had happened before, he had a theory about Will Septon, but he couldn't confirm it. He suspected that Will Septon was another snake of Mercury. As a sequence one, a snake of Mercury wasn't the only one. There could be up to 3 in existence at the same time. The snake of fate, who wielded destiny naturally, could locate Aaron's astral projection through the paper crane and show him a false revelation. Without a doubt, it also had the ability to change a person's fate. For some reason, Will Septon had become weak and was under the threat of the second snake of Mercury. Everything he did was to escape his counterpart. As for the reason for their conflict, the answer was simple. Without a sequence 0, there could be 3 sequence 1s at the same time, but once there was a sequence 0, there would be no sequence 1s. Regarding this sentence, the formula of the Dark Emperor potion clearly stated the truth. One of the main ingredients of the recipe was 2 beyonder characteristics of a Prince of Disorder. Prince of Disorder was sequence 1 of the Dark Emperor pathway. As a sequence 1, if one wanted to advance to sequence 0, then one had to obtain all the beyonder characteristics of the other 2 sequence 1s of the same pathway. With this guess in mind, Klein was increasingly afraid of getting involved with Will Septon's case. If my deduction is correct, it would be a genuine fight between deities, and I can't afford to get myself involved. Klein's spirituality descended, and he disappeared from the ancient palace above the gray fog. In Empress Borough, in an inconspicuous house, the Beyonder gathering organized by Mr. A proceeded as scheduled. Furs and Zio had changed their clothes, and they accompanied Viscount Glaint, who was wearing an iron-black mask, into the hall. They randomly chose a seat and sat down. Viscount Glaint wrote down his needs to the attendants before the gathering officially began. He also prayed to the goddess that there would be a response later. As usual, Furs maintained her usual languidness, and in a rare instance, covered herself with a hood, concealing her face with the shadows. She was thinking about the situation with Mr. Lawrence. She knew very clearly what that diamond, the size of an eye, was. It was a beyonder characteristic left behind by him. However, for the time being, she was unable to confirm what sequence it belonged to. Furs had casually flipped through the notebook, only to find that many of the pages were still blank. The written content was filled with all sorts of strange, odd, and mysterious symbols and magic labels, exceeding whatever she knew. What it is isn't important. What's important is that I keep my promise, Furs warned herself. At this moment Mr. A, who was seated on a single sofa and was wearing an exaggerated hood, said hoarsely, I have a mission. Help me find people who believe in the so-called fool. Ah, Furs instantly snapped back to her senses. Chapter 405. Cult, the Fool? The Beyonders who attended Mr. A's gathering either ruminated over the phrase, or conversed with their companions to discuss whether they had ever met anyone who had a similar faith. When did such a cult appear? Someone asked in a low voice. At this point, Mr. A made the attendant beside him hold up a blackboard with a few lines of words written in the lone language. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As the attendees examined the blackboard, Mr. A said in a hoarse and jarring voice, "Do not use Hermes to read what's written here. Even more so for Jotun, Elvish, Dragonese, and ancient Hermes. You shouldn't even write the corresponding descriptions. Otherwise, there is a high probability that something terrible will happen. Help me find believers in the fool." Of course, they might also be followers of the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, or the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As long as there's a clue, inform me immediately. The reward I'll provide will be so handsome that it will far exceed your imagination. This description, it sounds like an incredible existence. I've only seen similar descriptions in the ancient texts of the seven gods. A gathering member exclaimed. His companion shook his head and said, "The beings which many cults believe in have similar descriptions." Is it really a cult? The other gathering members were stunned when they heard their discussion. Likely, typically, when we summon a creature from the spirit world, we might have 3 lines describing it, but one of the lines would be about the blessed one of someone, or that who belongs to. It wouldn't be in this format. A gathering member, who was well-versed in mysticism, gave an explanation. As they vehemently conversed, Furs was nearly dumbfounded. Isn't that the honorific name of Mr. Fool? Even though it's described in the lone language, I'm sure of it. Why would Mr. A want to find the believers of Mr. Fool? Is the Aurora Order behind this? Furs's mind was in a mess. She knew that Mr. A was a member of the Aurora Order, because of a particular terrorist organization, had announced its responsibility in the assassination of Intis Ambassador Bakerland. After a brief moment of astonishment, Furs subconsciously began to examine herself, afraid that someone would discover that she was already a member of the Tarot Club, and that, in some sense, she was an adorer of the Fool. I just recited the honorific name of the Fool, according to the ancient Hermes on that piece of paper, and was pulled above the gray fog. No one knows about this, and I don't have to be afraid of being investigated. But there's a link to that piece of paper with Mr. Fool's honorific name written on it. It was hidden in a book we borrowed from the Viscount Glaint. Thoughts rapidly flashed through Furs's mind. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Isn't that the description I saw on that piece of paper? I even dreamed of an evil spirit. At the same time, Zio remembered the incident that had frightened her. But her long experience as a bounty hunter had kept her from revealing anything unusual. And then, as she recalled, she thought about the origin of the piece of paper. It was hidden in the bookcase of History of the Lone Kingdom's Aristocracy. That book was borrowed from Viscount Glaint's study. Suddenly, a name flashed in both Furs's and Zio's minds at the same time. Viscount Glaint. At that moment, Viscount Glaint was looking at the blackboard and said to himself with interest, "This honorific name is very rare. But it sounds very impressive." Just as he finished his sentence, he looked to his side in puzzlement, asking Furs and Zio, "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Nothing." Zio and Furs rapidly shook their heads at the same time. After dinner, in an elegantly decorated house, Audrey brought the huge golden retriever Susie into the living room under the guidance of her psychology teacher, Escalante. She was attending the academic meeting that had been agreed upon last week. Her maid and bodyguard stayed behind while she walked with Susie into a spacious activity room. In the activity room, be it for the atmosphere or some other reason, the gas lamps were not lit. The room was lit by gold-plated candle lamps on the coffee table and cupboard. Before Audrey could take a good look at her surroundings, she saw a gentleman in his 30s walking towards her. He wore a gray tailcoat. "This is the owner of this place, Mr. Stephen Hamprez, a furniture merchant." the long-haired Escalante introduced him. She was just about to tell him Audrey's identity when Hamprez chuckled and said, "Escalante, don't say anything. Let me have a chance at guessing." He had a neatly trimmed mustache and charming dark brown eyes. He appeared very gentle and elegant, nothing like a furniture merchant, but more like a university lecturer. After seriously sizing up Audrey a few times, he smiled and said, "Escalante only mentioned that you were her student. Haha, I believe you're a cultured noble lady, and you aren't someone who only looks good. There's no need for you to worry about a decline in the quality of your life. You're a little excited, very curious, and a relatively simple but also full of love. Of course, the most obvious point is that you're very beautiful, just like an angel." He made a final joke, pressed his hand to his chest, bowed and said, "Welcome, the beautiful Miss Angel. You're right, as expected of a member of the Psychology Alchemists. However, what you managed to observe was the me from a few months ago. It's all a facade I've put on for myself." Audrey opened her mouth in surprise and astonishment. "Did you know me before, Mr. Hamprez?" She didn't let her shocked expression linger too long on her face, because such emotions were meant to be instantaneous and wouldn't last too long. If anyone were to be surprised for several seconds, then it meant that their performance was most likely an act. Audrey didn't notice this at first, but after watching others act all this time, she naturally came up with a lot of rules. "No, I still don't know you. This is just the basics of being a psychology enthusiast." Hamprez chuckled. Before he could finish his sentence, Audrey had already completed her observations and made a corresponding judgment based on her surroundings. His attire and the furnishings of his house all indicate that he's a person who cares deeply about how people view him. The sapphire on the ring of his left hand doesn't look small, but its actual quality is very ordinary. There are no symbols or magic labels on it. His finances aren't as good as he presents them to be. He's vain. Even though he was very enthusiastic just now, the way he stands there, the direction in which his feet point, and the changes in his emotional colors all indicate that he still has many concerns and is on his guard. He sincerely commended me on my looks, but it wasn't in the way a man would look at a woman. There are signs of him using facial products, and his eyebrows are definitely drawn. His skills are inferior to my makeup maidservant Solia, but they're better than mine. The cologne he uses is confusion, something that I've only seen women use before. Yes, he probably likes men, and the role he plays is the weaker one in the relationship. At the same time, Audrey expressed her longing skillfully. "I'd love to have your observational powers, Mr. Hamprez." As she spoke, she maintained a faint smile while being introduced to the other 7 or 8 people in the activity room under Hamprez's and Escalante's lead. The lovers of both mysticism and psychology were either descendants of fallen aristocrats, associate professors at universities, or the children of the rich. For example, the father of a young man was the owner of Philip's department store, the most famous department store in Backlund. In the exchange that followed, Audrey basically only listened. The only time she spoke was by asking questions, fully expressing her curiosity and yearning. In this academic discussion, Escalante and Hamprez deliberately mentioned the body of heart and mind, as well as the spirit world and the collective subconscious. They also shared some relatively unique points of view, allowing Audrey to gradually understand some of the questions she had accumulated all this time. When the discussion ended and they were out of the house, Audrey glanced at Escalante beside her and asked, with a little naivety, "Ms. Escalante, when will I be as good in psychology as Mr. Hamprez?" Escalante curled the corners of her lips and slightly tilted her head as she looked at her. Very soon. At night, Klein, who was about to get into bed, once again appeared above the gray fog. Despite being a little sleepy, he was jolted awake by the news Miss Magician had reported. "The Aurora Order knows of the fool? They know of my honorific name? The true creator has locked on to me?" Klein abruptly sat up straight, as though he was about to face an attack. He quickly rejected the final theory. If the true creator had indeed locked on to him, Mr. A would have long visited him on the pretext of collecting a copper penny for the gas meter. Perhaps, even a saint might appear. That is to say, Only the fool and his corresponding honorific name are known, and the clues point to Backlund. Who leaked the news? Klein frowned as he carefully thought about it. Soon he discovered a possibility. Little Sun has recently chanted my honorific name, and it happened when he was interacting with a member of the exploratory team, who was corrupted by the true creator. He held a sacrificial ritual, and there were likely symbols corresponding to the fool at the scene. The ancient palace above the gray fog appeared. So the true creator sensed the existence of the fool, and confirmed that I was the one who had been sacrilegious. No, harassing. No, that's not right either. Spying on him. Also, Little Sun used the all-black eye at that time, which contains the mental corruption of the true creator. Through that, he has confirmed that my adorers and believers are in Backlund. I can't take the all-black eye out in the future. Having roughly understood the problem, Klein was left with another problem. Mr. A announced the bounty for Mr. Fool's believers at a not-so-private, relatively open Beyonder gathering. Is he just dumb, or is he deliberately fishing? Sigh, the Aurora Order members are all bigoted lunatics. Their brains are mostly damaged, so it's impossible to deduce their real intentions. This is as the saying goes, as long as I'm crazy, you won't be able to guess what I'm thinking. Chapter 406. A joyous but extremely helpless reality above the gray fog. The magnificent palace stood silently. Klein drummed his fingers rhythmically on the edge of the long bronze table, concentrating on what he could do in the face of the threat of the Aurora Order and Mr. A. While having a hard time figuring out the other party's intentions, he instinctively came up with an idea. Report Mr. A. Report illegal gatherings. Klein could very easily learn of the location where Mr. A held the gathering through Miss Magician, and thus, he would be able to easily report it to the Nighthawks, the mandated Punisher, or the machinery hive mind in secret. An oracle of the Aurora Order was bound to garner enough attention. When that happens, Mr. A's safety would probably be at risk, so he probably wouldn't have the time or effort to track down the believers of the fool. The problem, however, was that this was bound to implicate a group of innocent Beyonders. And Klein suspected that this was the reason why Mr. A directly offered a reward for the believers of the fool. Perhaps he had long planned an escape. Once someone reports him, he would be able to confirm without a doubt that the fool's believers were among the previous gathering members. As for who it was exactly, that wasn't important. Mr. A and the lunatics of the Aurora Order were definitely capable of taking exhaustive measures. And once these Beyonders fell into their hands, many of them would be unable to hide their secrets. The Aurora Order, or the Shepherd Pathway, which represented the true creator, are the best at corrupting others. When the ideology of a Beyonder was completely twisted, and once they believed in the true creator wholeheartedly, what else could be kept a secret? It's not like there's no other way. It's best not to report it. Klein leaned back in his chair, collected his thoughts, and reorganized the entire matter. As he was thinking, he suddenly realized a problem. There were no believers or adorers of the fool in this world. Even the Tarot Club only had a few members, and no one had divulged the relevant information. In other words, the Aurora Order wouldn't be able to find any relevant clues. There's nothing to worry about. The only bad outcome is that the fool is now targeted by the true creator. Although being targeted by an evil god isn't a pleasant feeling, it basically wouldn't affect anything else. Klein nodded thoughtfully. He had thought it through very clearly. The only flaw in this matter was that he had once used the title of the fool, written in the language of ancient Hermes, as a password for an anonymous account. However, with the sacrificial and bestowal rituals having proven useful, the account had long been abandoned, and had long since been forgotten. Since the last month and a half, no one had been noticed by Klein for copying the password, so it was possible to deduce the actual situation. As such, bank employees, who had been in contact with the password, but apparently do not understand mysticism, wouldn't be able to reveal it to anyone, and Beyonders would at most make requests in the loan language. So even if they find the right person, it's not possible to connect the content described in the loan language with that of the ancient Hermes password. If anyone had copied it down, I would be the first to know, and would be able to respond effectively. Besides, even if someone finds the password, it would be difficult to trace it back to Sherlock Moriarty. I use a variety of means every time. Miss Justice is also sufficiently careful when saving money. While wrapping the table, Klein relaxed and said with a chuckle, "You believe that the fool has many adorers and believers, and that this would result in many clues that cannot be hidden. Wrong, especially wrong. There's only one believer and adorer of the fool, and that's me." When he said that, he couldn't help but let out a self-deprecating laugh. "It doesn't seem like it's something that I should be proud of. I need to be a little careful for the time being. I shouldn't go around using the banner of the fool," Klein reminded himself, and went back to answering Miss Magician's prayers. He adjusted his posture and said in a low, gentle voice, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." When Furs received the answer, she was surprised but also felt that it was only right. In the eyes of Mr. Fool, the Aurora Order is nothing but a bunch of ants. Furs once again recited his honorific name in a low voice, and she curiously asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, which existence does the Aurora Order believe in?" Then, she saw Mr. Fool sitting on a high-backed chair in the middle of the gray fog. He leisurely said, "The true creator. The true creator." Furs's eyes widened as she instantly understood why Mr. A suddenly sought out the believers of the fool. With the help of the Tarot Club, that Sun youth in the City of Silver had successfully exposed the abnormality of the exploratory team and thwarted the true creator's ploy. Behind this incident is a confrontation and struggle between Mr. Fool and the true creator. Furs didn't dare to ask any further, and she quickly recounted her meeting with the members of the Abraham family. She also mentioned Lawrence's will, the strange notebook, and the Beyonder characteristic he had left behind. "Honorable Mr. Fool, what should I do?" she asked for advice with uncertainty. "What should you do? Miss Magician really is lucky. Why haven't I encountered such a good thing?" Klein responded with a chuckle. "Follow the true desires in your heart." He wasn't the least bit worried that Dorian Gray, from Pritz Harbor's Fishermen Association, would harm Miss Magician, because he knew she had 2 more stones on her bracelet, allowing her to teleport through the spirit world twice. Follow the true desires in my heart? Furs lowered her head in thought. "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Fool." She decided to buy a steam locomotive ticket tomorrow. Using this mode of transportation, it would take a little over an hour to get from Backlund to Pritz Harbor, or maybe less. After reporting everything, Furs requested to hold a sacrificial and bestowal ritual. After receiving a positive response, she exchanged £600 in cash for the Sheriff Beyonder characteristic. Holding up the fist-shaped object comprised of black iron, dark red and silver colors, as well as its beautiful spiritual radiance, Furs felt joy and admiration. Zio had long gathered the supplementary ingredients, so she would soon be promoted to Sequence 8. "And I don't know when I'll become a trick master. I hope Mr. Hanged Man and the others can help me find the appropriate Beyonder ingredients as soon as possible." Zio had been subconsciously acting as an arbiter, so she didn't have to worry about her digestion of the Sequence 9 potion. But once she becomes a sheriff, what should she do? Should I ask permission from Mr. Fool to teach her the acting method? Or should I simply suggest that she sneak into the police force? At the end of the long mottled table, Klein looked at the thick stack of cash in front of him and carefully counted it several times. Through this method, I would have £1,230. I would still be short of £300 to obtain a single Sequence 6 Beyonder ingredient. Of course, £1,500 is the minimum price, and the actual transaction price is usually much higher than this. Where else can I get money these days? As soon as the bicycle patent is granted, shall I sell a portion of the shares? Yes, I almost forgot how special the Tarot Club is. The werewolf Beyonder characteristic cannot be sold in Backlund for now, so as to avoid being discovered by high-sequence Beyonders from the Rose School of Thought. But I can always sell it elsewhere. I'll let the world entrust Mr. Hanged Man to sell it at the Sonia C at the next gathering. I'll offer a corresponding amount of the commission as his reward. After subtracting the costs, the werewolf Beyonder characteristic should give me at least £1,000. It will be more than enough for a single sequence 6 Beyonder ingredient. Klein quickly came up with a plan and decided upon it. He found it a little regrettable that Miss Zio didn't seem to have much money. After she became a sheriff, even if she could quickly digest the potion, it would still take her a long time to buy the interrogator's Beyonder characteristic. And if the Abraham family were to take interest in Miss Magician, his subsequent astrologer potion formula would no longer be marketable. What a pity! Klein sighed and returned to the real world. Wednesday morning. Klein didn't suffer from insomnia due to being targeted by the true creator and the Aurora Order's pursuit. He slept till daybreak and happily went out to buy a Desi pie for breakfast. There was no doubt that Desi pie required sweet iced tea to match it. As he enjoyed the food and flipped through the newspapers, he discovered the advertisement for the Ernst firm and learned that there would be a Beyonder gathering convened by Eye of Wisdom tomorrow night. This time, I'll be able to request to purchase the relevant Beyonder ingredients, but there's a high chance that it wouldn't be available. Even if there's something, it will be supplementary ingredients like the hair of a deep-sea naga. Klein seriously considered the channels in which he could find the ingredients. He spread out his left hand and counted with his fingers. From the Tarot Club, there are the outlets of Little Sun, Mr. Hangman, Miss Justice, and the rest. Beyond that, I have Eye of Wisdom's gathering, Miss Bodyguard and Merrick, but I shouldn't contact them if possible for the time being. Also, yes, I have Vampire Emlyn White. Didn't he mention that he would write to ask some powerful sanguines? That's what social connections can bring about. Coming to this thought, Klein immediately decided to go to the Harvest Church to wait for Emlyn White. Although it was impossible for the Aurora Order to track him down, it still gave him a sense of urgency, making him want to gather the Beyonder ingredients as soon as possible. When he digested his potion, he would quickly advance to sequence 6. 10 in the morning, south of the bridge, Rose Street. In his double-breasted frock coat, Klein took off his half-top hat and strolled into the rather small Harvest Church. At first glance, he saw the giant-like Father Utravsky and Emlyn White, who was dressed in brown priest robes. The latter was wiping the candle lamps with a numb look on his face, as though he would rather be dead. What a coincidence! Wait, don't tell me he's here for the entire day. He only returns home at night? Klein casually found a seat and sat down. There were less than 5 devotees in the entire cathedral. Emlyn White also saw him and put down the rag. He walked over and sat beside him. The vampire's expression suddenly became lively. He raised his chin and said with a chuckle, "You came here suddenly because you have something you need my help with, right?" Chapter 407. The True Adorer Inside the Harvest Church. Klein tilted his head to glance at Emlyn White. Without ruining the serene atmosphere, he deliberately suppressed his voice and laughed, returning with a question. "Are you short on money?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he felt as if he were asking if Emlyn knew about the multi-level marketing company Amway. Emlyn was first taken aback, before he scoffed. "Don't insult a noble sanguine with money." Klein instantly sneered. Looking at the tall and brawny Father Utravsky in front of him, he said rather casually, "According to what I know, those handmade puppets are not cheap. They can even be called expensive, especially those that are as tall as a human." Emlyn gaped his mouth in an attempt to retort, but he failed to say a word. After a moment of silence, he coughed lightly, feigned indifference, and said, "Tell me, what is it that you want my help with? I'm not a sanguine who likes riddles." Klein didn't look at the vampire next to him. He smiled and said, "I have a friend who is about to advance. He needs to collect the relevant Beyonder ingredients. I wonder if you can help?" "Are you doubting the capabilities of a sanguine?" Emlyn White said arrogantly. "Even if I don't have them, I can write and inquire from the nobler excellencies. That's what I want." Klein immediately responded with a deluge of words. Mutated pituitary gland of a 1,000-faced hunter, and 100 milliliters of its blood. Characteristic of a human skin shadow, and 5 strands of a deep-sea naga. As long as I can get any of these, I will pay you the corresponding price. The cheaper the price, the more you will be rewarded. He purposefully increased the number of supplementary ingredients to avoid any losses. Upon hearing this description without any stuttering, Emlyn White suddenly felt as if he had fallen into a trap of sophistry. He calmed his emotions and said, "The cost for the Beyonder ingredients is at least £100, while supplementary ingredients are at least £10. Although I'm not clear of the level of the things you want, I believe that they're definitely not cheap or common. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to me for help." "Very smart." Klein laughed. "Deal." At this moment, Emlyn White had a deep suspicion that he was asking for too little. Therefore he added, "Mr. Detective, do you have any clues on removing the psychological cues?" Seeing that Father Yutravsky was concentrating on his prayers at the altar ahead of them, Klein turned to glance at the vampire and said, "I have the simplest method." "What?" Emlyn White's red eyes lit up. "Defeat Bishop Yutravsky and snatch his mental terror candle away," Klein said with a chuckle. "After you meet up with your parents, you should possess the strength needed. Are 3 sanguines not the match of a single Dawn Paladin?" The corners of Emlyn's mouth twitched as his expression collapsed. "We lost. We couldn't beat him. My parents were nearly captured. That mental terror candle is really strange." "So you've already tried." The entire family almost converted to become believers of Mother Earth. 3 sanguines weren't even able to defeat Father Yutravsky? With the help of the mental terror candle and the blood transfuser, Father Yutravsky is that terrifying? Or are vampires too weak? However, all the rumors point towards vampires being rather powerful, Klein said in thought. Then you can write a letter and ask for the help of the Noble Excellencies. There shouldn't be a lack of powerful experts among the sanguine. Emlyn White answered with a numb expression. They refused. Suddenly he looked at Klein with hope. "Can you defeat Father Yutravsky? Or could your friend beat him?" After receiving the sun brooch and the biological poison bottle, and digesting most of the potion, I originally thought that I would be able to defeat Father Yutravsky in my spirit-body state. However, your description just now made me uncertain. Is the mental terror candle that bizarre? This kind of sealed artifact is obviously great at restraining spirit bodies. Klein rationally shook his head. No way. He quickly changed the subject. Why would those noble excellencies of the sanguine refuse your request? To them, this should be a simple favor. Emlyn White's face instantly turned ashen. They say that Father Yutravsky is an adorer of Mother Earth. They do not wish to enter into direct conflict with him. They are studying means to remove the psychological cue. For example, they are venturing deep into the Sonia Sea, the Fog Sea, and the Berserk Sea, in search of the dragons that have long secluded themselves. He added with a smile even uglier than a weeping face. By the time they figure it out, or find a dragon well-versed in the psyche domain, I might have already become a devout believer of Mother Earth. I'm beginning to appreciate how precious life is, and how joyful a harvest is. An adorer of Mother Earth? Father Yutravsky is an adorer of Mother Earth? It's no wonder that he has so many mystical items. From the looks of it, as a powerful pirate, suddenly switching to the Mother Earth wasn't a simple matter. Klein sighed, and then he felt a sense of lingering fear. He had almost agreed to Emlyn White's request to attempt to defeat Father Yutravsky. If I lose, then I might even be locked up in the basement and forced into confinement. If I win, I might just offend another deity. No, there's no way of me winning. The adorer of Mother Earth definitely has an appropriate trump card. If it wasn't for Father Yutravsky suppressing his split personality, then I probably wouldn't have been able to defeat him. Klein wisely didn't pursue the topic. He once again looked at Father Yutravsky and said, "You can try to find an organization called the Psychology Alchemists. Otherwise, you'll have to wait for Miss Justice of our Tarot Club to become a psychiatrist. By then, you might be reluctant to break away from the faith of Mother Earth." Klein silently added. To him, it was best if Emlyn White also joined the Psychology Alchemists. That way, if Miss Justice encountered any problems in the organization, he could help her with other resources, and Klein wouldn't always have to summon himself, who was the trinity of the fool, an adorer and a believer. Psychology Alchemists? I've never heard of it. Emlyn shook his head disdainfully. It must be a secret organization that recently appeared. This organization has existed for 100 or 200 years, at the very least. Klein denied his statement. For a sanguine with a long lifespan, 100 or 200 years means it recently appeared. Among the noble excellencies, a nap might be as long as a century, Emlyn White said proudly. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he looked ahead, cleared his throat, and said, "Do you know how to contact that organization?" Klein was going to answer that there was a man in the Tianjin city's asylum named Dr. Daxter Guderian, who's a member of the psychology alchemists. But he stopped those words just before they came out of his mouth. With the true creator targeting me, it's best that I don't get involved with people or matters in Tianjin. There's a certain risk of exposure, and once exposed, with the Aurora Order's madness, they would definitely not let Benson and Melissa go. Klein slightly shook his head and said, "I've only heard of this organization. You can write and ask the other sanguine." Emlyn White was disappointed and stopped talking about it. He turned his head to look at Klein and said, "I'm guessing your friend who's about to advance is you." Klein looked forward without a care and replied leisurely, "Congratulations, you got it right." Emlyn White was stunned. This was completely different from what he had expected. Noticing his change, Klein laughed softly. "Mr. White, the most suitable job for you isn't to be an apothecary, but to be an actor." Emlyn was stunned at first, but he immediately raised his head arrogantly and said, "I'm a deep, noble sanguine. I don't rely on my looks to make a living. Do you think I'm praising you for being handsome?" Klein slowly stood up and laughed. "No, I mean you are very talented at comedy." While Emlyn White's expression froze, he squeezed his way out to the aisle and said, "Don't forget what I entrusted you with. Pritz Harbor, White Oak Street." Furs Wall took the steam locomotive early in the morning and arrived at the kingdom's largest and most important port. She had also booked tickets for her return trip by boat, which was relatively inexpensive. Taking in the smell of the sea, Furs saw many of the dockworkers who were in a hurry. In the middle of each season, the port was swarming with temporary workers for relatively decent pay, and many poor people living in Backland's East Borough would head southeast on foot, and in groups, traveling a distance of more than 60 kilometers. This was the same thing they did when harvesting hops. The roads are wider than Backland's, and the air quality isn't bad, but it's relatively dirtier. Furs looked around and found the Fishermen Association in an old building. Without much trouble, she met Dorian Gray in an office. The gentleman was of medium build, with exaggerated arms. His hair was combed rather neatly, completely unlike most of the members of the association, who had hairstyles that looked like bird nests. He should also be an Abraham family member. After explaining the purpose of her visit, Furs passed Lawrence's will, along with the strange notebook and the diamond-like Beyonder characteristic. Dorian received the items with a complicated expression before opening the will first. After reading it carefully, he lifted his head and looked earnestly at Furs with his blue eyes. "Your kindness and honor are praiseworthy, Ms. Wall. I shall always remember the help you provided Elisa and Lawrence. Can you accept my gratitude? I wish to invite you to lunch." "No problem." Furs was still wondering how to pass the time before her ship sailed. Dorian immediately arranged for her to wait in the next lounge, offering black tea, snacks, newspapers, and magazines. Returning to the office, the gentleman opened a hidden cabinet with some misgivings and took out an item. It was a pure crystal ball shining with a radiant light. Chapter 408. A bold assumption. Dorian drew the curtains, cloaking the office with darkness before he sat down. He held the crystal ball in his left hand, while touching its top with his right palm. As he stroked the crystal ball back and forth, he kept chanting softly. Gradually, the radiant points of light within the crystal ball began to shine brighter and brighter, becoming more and more obvious, as if the stars in the night sky were casting their reflections. Often used to determine the direction of fate, the stars in the trajectory of one's life surfaced one after another, forming a three-dimensional astrolabe with many revelations from the spirit world that resembled symbols. Dorian Gray finally stopped and studied it. She wasn't lying. That really was the trajectory of the situation. She seems to be able to bring about changes to the Abraham family. Optimistic changes. As the light from the crystal ball dimmed, Dorian stood up, having already made up his mind. At lunchtime, in the Four-Winged Bird restaurant, in front of Furs lay a filleted fried fish which had rosemary scattered over it. Its skin was crispy, its meat fresh, and it didn't have any fine bones. It was rather tasty, but the only problem was that the cook had an extremely warped sense of aesthetics. He had deliberately kept the eyes of the fish bulging out of its head, and by plating the food, he made the fish look up, as though to express its indignation over its death. Furs pushed the head down, cut off the tail, and covered the upturned eye. At that moment, Dorian Gray began moving his fork and knife as he casually said, Elisa really liked mysticism, and had done some research in this area. When you were packing her things, did you see any books, notes, or other items? There were some notebooks and books, Furs answered frankly. As a result, I became a mysticism enthusiast, but unfortunately, I couldn't understand some of the content at all. For example, the sights in the spirit world. Not only was it absurd, illogical, and messy, incapable of expressing ideas. Even if I forced myself to read it and systematically calm my impatience, it was still difficult to remember its contents. I would forget it once I finished reading it, let alone understand it. Furs added inwardly. Dorian nodded slightly and laughed. Then you can consult me. I'm also a mysticism enthusiast. Quite a proficient one, if I may add. Really? That's great. Furs answered appropriately. Seeing that she was really interested, Dorian immediately diverted the topic to mysticism. Sometimes he would bring up the spirit world, and sometimes he would talk about his cogitation experience. Having been prepared before he even stepped into the restaurant, he had deliberately chosen a secluded and quiet spot. Hence, he didn't need to fear that the customers around them would overhear their conversation. At the end of the lunch, Dorian offered, I didn't know how to express my gratitude, but now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Haha, although Lawrence had paid you, I don't think that's enough to match your kindness, good-heartedness, and honor. Ms. Wall, you can write to me and ask about any questions you have about mysticism. That's the least I can do to express my gratitude. That's what I wish for. Furs didn't refuse. From the exchange just now, she could clearly tell that Dorian Gray possessed rich, systematic mysticism knowledge. He was indeed worthy of being a member of the ancient Abraham family. And this was also considered something she was lacking in. Although she had mastered quite a lot of knowledge about the beyonder world, it all came from a few books and notebooks that didn't go in depth, as well as random information she had heard and experienced from the various gatherings she attended. It wasn't comprehensive or systematic enough, and it just had too many shortcomings. Upon hearing her reply, Dorian raised his cup and smiled. I hope that one day, we will also possess mysterious and extraordinary powers. Northborough and Backlund, St. Samuel Cathedral. A group of men wearing black windbreakers and red gloves entered an underground area. The leader was a man in his 40s with soft facial features and long hair. Wearing a pompous top hat, he carried a black cane which was inlaid with gold. He quietly followed the Nighthawk leading the way, and entered a rather spacious room. There were many bookshelves in the room, with various dossiers placed on them. A mesmerizing, beautiful woman wearing a black robe with blue eyeshadow and blush was leisurely sitting in a high-backed chair. She didn't get up to greet him. It was the former spirit medium Daly. Soist, all the information you need is over there. Daly gestured with her chin at the table by the door. The middle-aged man named Soist smiled and said, Daly, why were you sent to guard this place? You should be tasked with more important matters. No, this is what I wanted. I need to settle down and read more information. Daly chuckled. This is to ease my future progress. Humans are fragile creatures, and they need a certain amount of time to calm down. No one can always be in peak condition, enjoying the thrill and pleasure, without any rest. Your style really has never changed. Unfortunately, you've never given me the chance. Sois burst out laughing. Daly shook her head seriously and said, Obviously, you don't understand me. My current hobby has turned even more novel. If you can turn yourself into a rotten corpse, or expose your white bones, then I'll definitely be filled with interest in you. She turned to look at the red glove behind Soest. Leonard, why did you choose to join his team? This fellow is conceited, arrogant and gutless. He keeps fantasizing that women would take the initiative to crawl into bed, waiting for him. To be honest, perhaps this is the unique trait of a nightmare? When she mentioned nightmare, Daly visibly paused. Leonard helplessly said, Ma'am Daly, this was the arrangement of His Excellency Casimir. Is that so? I can see that you agree with my views on Soest, Daly concluded in a slightly husky voice. Leonard was momentarily at a loss for an explanation. Fortunately, Soul Assurer Soest didn't pay much attention to Daly's words. Walking over to the table filled with information, he picked up a dossier and flipped through it. Leonard and the others immediately surrounded him, imitating their leader. After the sound of paper flipping went on for some time, Soest casually asked, What's new in Backland recently? Something you think is worth paying attention to? Daly's eyes moved slightly. After thinking for a while, she said, A few Beyonders who work with us have passed on news that many people are searching for an organization that believes in the Fool, and they have given the corresponding honorific name. After describing the Fool's honorific name in the Lone language, she chuckled. I seem to be witnessing the birth of an entirely new cult. Of course, it might be the incarnation of an old friend. What do you think, Soest? Soest considered the matter seriously before saying, No, I've never heard of such an organization. At that moment, Leonard looked up from the dossier he was reading and mused. Could this have something to do with the 2 tarot rituals we're investigating? The Fool is the first card in a deck of tarot cards, the most important major arcana card. Daly froze for a second, then she nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting idea, but there's no evidence. It's pure speculation, and it cannot even be considered a deduction, Soest said, disapproval within his tone. Leonard revealed a faint smile and said, Emperor Roselle once said to make a bold hypothesis, and then carefully back it up. Hillstonborough Quelleg Club. As soon as Klein entered the hall after leaving the Harvest Church, he saw the equestrian teacher, Talum Dumont, sitting in a secluded corner, seemingly pondering over something. Noticing that lunch was still some time away, Klein went over and greeted him with a smile. Good afternoon, Talum. You seem to have encountered another problem? Talum snapped to his senses with a start, and hurriedly shook his head. No, nothing. You seem to have done something that you have a guilty conscience about. Klein mumbled, sat down and laughed. It's a pity Aaron and Mike aren't here. Otherwise we'd be having another pleasant afternoon. Talum smiled in response. They're all busy and have very little free time. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he looked around and said, Sherlock, there's an important figure who is very interested in you after hearing about your deeds. He would like to meet you. Would you be willing? Frankly speaking, this leaves me envious. It's a very rare opportunity. Wait, what deeds did I do? Help Mrs. Mary catch her adulterous husband? Accompany reporter Mike to a brothel? Even in my past few trips to East Borough, I didn't do anything impressive. At the very most, they'd know that I made a contribution to the serial murders, and that I helped Dr. Aaron resolve his nightmare by providing him with counsel. Klein was confused. After 2 seconds, he suddenly understood the reason. The important figure must have asked Talum if he knew of an excellent detective, and he could only think of me. So he offered to embellish descriptions about me that sounded pretty impressive, such as the true person who cracked the case behind the serial murders. The person who noticed that Mrs. Mary's former husband and his mistress had attempted to siphon funds from the Coim Company. I was probably described as being effective and sharp, a great detective who struck swiftly and precisely. This is how you tout each other in business. Klein sighed. He hesitated for a moment and said, I'm sorry, Talum, but as a detective, I have my own principles, and that is to not get involved in matters involving important figures. On the stage of the higher-ups, what might be a sneeze-like friction among them might very well be an unbearable disaster for me. I won't paint a target on my back, so I won't see this important figure. This was actually something Klein had decided upon before he became a detective. He was prone to an investigation once he was involved with high society. Therefore, Before he became a faceless, he didn't want to bear such risks. You're very rational. Talum sighed and said. The important figure has anticipated this reaction and believes that such a detective is even more trustworthy. So he wishes for you to take on a commission that wouldn't involve high society. What kind of commission? Klein asked. Talum chuckled and said, the Capim case which you and Mike were talking about last time. The important figure is very interested in the organization that uses tarot cards. He said that there has been more than one such case, and wishes for you to find any relevant clues. Chapter 409. December what? Getting me to investigate myself again? Klein nearly suspected that this was a deliberate test. An organization that uses tarot cards to represent itself really is interesting. And I think so. But I don't want to sell myself out. Right, Capim's matter is clearly not that simple. He had a total of 4 Beyonders protecting him, so there must be a powerful faction behind him. What's the difference between investigating this case and being involved in high society strife? Well, this isn't something Sherlock Moriarty should know. Klein revealed a thoughtful expression, and while weighing his options he said, it's not easy to find a mysterious organization. Besides, it's very dangerous. Talum seemed to have expected his answer and chuckled. Sherlock, there's no need for you to take risks. The important figure's intention is for you to pay more attention and to gather the relevant information or rumors. Here's £5 in cash, money for your activities. Even if you don't receive any valuable information, the money is yours. And once you gather any useful clues, he'll pay you per lead and reimburse you for your expenses throughout the process. Such good conditions? That important figure has put a lot of his attention on this matter. Does he have connections with the forces behind Capim? Or does he wish to find the mysterious organization that uses tarot cards as a code name to help him? Reimburse. It's been a long time since I've heard someone promise me something like this. Since he's already gone so far by promising me such perks, it would appear very suspicious if a private detective were to refuse the commission. Furthermore, the matter of investigating myself should clearly be left to me. Klein hesitated for a few seconds and said, all right, I'll do my best. He didn't stand on ceremony, and he accepted the 5 one-pound notes that Talum handed him, intending to provide a vague clue every week or two. Isn't the Aurora Order looking for the Fool? The Fool is obviously part of a tarot card. I hope that important figure will pursue this path all the way and get rid of Mr. A. A thought began to form in Klein's mind. Under St. Samuel Cathedral, Sol Assurer Soist assembled his team together to discuss their subsequent actions. He looked at the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell and asked, half asking and half evaluating, if I were to relegate this matter to you, how do you plan on investigating the 2 cases related to the tarot ritual? Leonard lifted his hand to comb his hair, smiled and said, first, I would go according to my train of thought from before. I would do a reverse search for the people or organizations seeking the Fool's believers. They might know something. Second, I would reinvestigate the first 2 cases and place all the people involved in a name list, regardless of if they were suspects or not. Then, I'll use the powers of a nightmare to inquire and eliminate them one by one. The devil might be in the details, hidden in the person who's most improbable. Soist let out a chuckle. I've read through the dossiers. These 2 cases involve a lot of people, each living in different places. Wanting to re-examine them is quite difficult, and some of them are already Beyonders, who are secretly active beneath the surface. They know how to hide themselves very well, and we have no way of knowing where they are. If we were to perform an investigation according to your idea, then what we need wouldn't be a small team. The church would have to inject at least 5 more Sequence 7 or above Nighthawks, and the corresponding support personnel. The case we are in charge of is focused on the devil summoning case, another red glove reminded Leonard. Leonard didn't seem angry, as he let out a soft laugh. I know. I'm only providing my point of view. As for whether or not it is used, or the extent to which it will be used will be decided by Captain Soist. He paused for a moment, and revealed a puzzled expression. I don't understand why the two cases related to the tarot rituals didn't have a high priority. The former involved an evil god's attempted descent, countless times more serious than a mere devil summoning. Sois picked up his coffee and took a sip before leisurely answering. The Nighthawks have limited manpower. All cases require a certain priority level. Up to now, the secret organization represented by tarot cards hasn't expressed any obvious malice towards us. Their actions, to a certain extent, have helped us. For example, they foiled the descent of the true creator, as well as letting us know that the human trafficker, Capim, isn't a simple person. There must be some big secret underlying the matter. After saying that, he smiled and said, "Perhaps they can help us discover even more unsavory matters. Of course, the necessary investigations must be carried out. No one can guarantee that a secret organization will not end up being our enemy in the future." "I see, Captain Soest. Let's focus on the devil summoning case," Leonard said earnestly. In a Backland winter that was inseparable from fireplaces and fog, time flew by amidst these cold and gray sensations. In the blink of an eye, there was only half a month left until the new year. Klein extinguished the charcoal in the fireplace and put on a double-breasted frock coat over his dark red woolen vest. Nearly 3 weeks ago, Leopard finally received the bike patent and began looking for suitable second-round investors. Steam Power Mogul, from his cage, ended up showing some interest in this. After several meetings, the three parties agreed to conclude their final negotiations today. During the past month or so, Klein led an uneventful life. Through his investigations, he slowly digested the potion by strictly following the principles. Now he was just short of a relatively bigger performance that he needed to initiate to completely digest it. If there are no urgent matters, I can avoid taking risks. It would take about another. As his mind wandered, Klein removed the half-top hat from the coat rack and smoothed the folds with a brush and handkerchief, removing the dust. The badge left behind by Lenevis indicated a January 4th gathering. He had no strong intentions on attending it. During this time, the Tarot Club continued being held on a weekly basis. Klein obtained a few pages of Roselle's early diary entries, allowing him to witness how he went from a weakling, who only knew how to dream without taking actual action, to becoming a playboy who actively hunted. Apart from this, he gained almost nothing. Although the werewolf Beyonder characteristic was handed over to the Hanged Man for sale via the world, a sale involving more than £1,000 was obviously not easy to close. The werewolf's unique trait of being cursed also caused many interested parties to shrink back from it. However, a few days ago at a tarot gathering, the Hanged Man told the world that he had contacted an artisan from the Church of the God of Steam, and the other party was clearly interested. Let's hope the deal would be closed this week. There are still no clues to the Windbless formula, which Mr. Hanged Man wants. Klein packed his personal belongings, picked up his cane, wore his hat, and walked out the door. The Windbless potion formula was a sequence 6 formula. It wasn't that easy to encounter one. The Hanged Man, Alger, had waited for more than a month without receiving any good news. Justice Audrey, after undergoing a long period of observation and testing, was finally accepted by the psychology alchemists. She reported to Mr. Fool that she should be officially joining the secret organization this week, hoping to be blessed ahead of time to prevent any accidents from happening. For this, she was prepared to plunder at least 10 pages of Roselle's diary entries from the psychology alchemists for Mr. Fool without any compensation. As for the dragon specimen in Duke Negan's treasury, she had already confirmed that it was a thousand-faced hunter. However, it was purely a sample that was without the corresponding Beyonder characteristic or flowing blood. The £2,000 she owed Mr. Fool's adorer wouldn't be repaid until February or March of next year. This was because, although she would officially come of age at the New Year's ball and be able to take charge of a portion of her fortune, she would still be under the supervision of her parents and wouldn't be able to sell them at will. Furthermore, she was still short of Viscount Glaint's final payment, so she needed ample time to raise the money in secret. The magician Furs, with the help of the Hanged Man, finally obtained the blood of a deep-sea marlin. She paid him £320 for it, which reduced her savings to £120. In order to make up for her loss, and for the stomach pouch of a spirit eater, she began to furiously rush to write her new book, which quickly took shape. It told a story about adventure, love, traveling, storms, pirates, and many other elements fused into a whole. Her and Dorian Gray's correspondence never stopped, and the other party had recently announced that they would be coming to Backlund to pay their respects to Alyssa, Labero, and Lawrence. The son Derek, who was acting normally as suggested by the hanged man, continued his daily patrols, amassed merit points, and didn't attempt any rituals. At every tarot gathering, he would skillfully pretend to be asleep, and he didn't reveal any problems for the time being. Usually, he would occasionally take a nap to prevent any irregularities from being detected, which would put him under suspicion. According to him, Shepherd Elder Lovia didn't leave the bottom of the spire 7 days later, and was still locked in there for unknown reasons. With the Aurora Order's Mr. A searching for the followers and adorers of the Fool, they failed to receive any valuable clues with Klein's deliberate attempt to keep a low profile. And the Beyonders, who knew the honorific name of the Fool, all understood that they should never chant such words carelessly, unless they were in dire straits, and they definitely didn't have the courage to pray to an existence that was suspected of being an evil god. Emlyn mentioned the last time that he had some clues for the corresponding ingredients, and that he might be able to confirm it soon. But the problem is that I'm lacking the money now. With a silent grunt, Klein took his cane and walked to Lawyer Jurgen's door. When the doorbell rang, he took the initiative, and instinctively took 2 steps back. Not long after, the door opened and old Mrs. Doris cheerfully opened her arms to give Klein a warm hug. "Oh, the doctor you introduced last time was wonderful. My body hasn't been this healthy for almost 10 years. Doris, seeing that the detective was standing far away, could only fold her arms and express her delight and feelings in words. Klein said in an amused and exasperated tone, "Mrs. Doris, you've already told me this for the 9th time." He saw Brody, the black cat, sitting on top of the coat rack. Although it looked precarious, he was able to maintain his balance. "I can do that as well." Klein made a self-evaluation. "Is that so?" Old Mrs. Doris asked, perplexed. She immediately tossed the question to the back of her mind and said with a smile, "Are you here for Jurgen?" Klein immediately revealed a smile. "Yes. Matters involving negotiations needed the help of a professional lawyer." Chapter 410. From his cage, St. George Borough, Surge Street. As soon as Klein and Jurgen alighted from the carriage, they saw a massive object parked in front of Inventor Leopard's door. It was iron black in color, with a dozen wheels in 3 groups, the top of which towered like a ship's chimney, and smoke was emitted from it. It was a steam engine that Klein had seen in magazines and on the streets, often described by the public as an ironclad warship with a rather exaggerated body. If the streets that hadn't been built or rebuilt in the last 20 or 30 years, then it would have filled the roads and left no room for horse carriages. Therefore, transportation vehicles such as this could only be seen in certain areas and places. At this moment, the heavy glass window and door of the car opened, and 2 figures stepped out. One of them was the steam power mogul from his cage, whom Klein had met before. A quarter of his blood was of the Fasak Empire, and he had pale blue eyes and a tall but bulging build. He had a pipe in his mouth. The person beside him was wearing a heavy black coat with a gray scarf wrapped around his neck. His features were unremarkable. He looked common with his black hair and brown eyes. Yet he exuded an inexplicable sense of familiarity. "Hi, Detective Moriarty, you're really punctual. This is my lawyer and partner, Pacheco Duane." While they conversed, 2 burly men got out of the steam-powered vehicle. They were obviously Framus's bodyguards. How unprofessional. Shouldn't they come down first, and then open the door for their boss? Klein grunted, smiled in greeting, and introduced his lawyer Jurgen. While he was waiting for Leopard to open the door, he casually chatted with him. "Mr. Cage, is this kind of steam-powered vehicle popular? Do a lot of people like it?" Framus Cage laughed. "Those who think that they're decent say that it's too barbaric and crude, and ordinary people can't afford it. Only I, an enthusiast of such machinery and steam, would be willing to buy it. It's mainly because many streets are too narrow, Klein said in consolation. Fromme's cage was the investor he found, and he had little to do with Leopard. When he was playing cards at the Quelag Club, he had deliberately mentioned it, and the equestrian teacher, Talum, immediately mentioned that Frommes liked similar inventions, offering to introduce them to each other. This made Klein sigh with emotion. The club really was a great place to develop connections, and the members who joined it were never really interested in the free food, drinks, and activity venues. Haha, this is indeed one of the reasons. As the population increases and the cities grow larger, the horse carriage will definitely be eliminated. It's just too slow. What this world is pursuing now is efficiency, Frommes said confidently. He then revealed a smile. Also, I've already obtained an order from the military. They want me to make some improvements, just like it was mentioned in Roselle's manuscript. Increase the armor's bulletproof plating, cover the tracks so that it can drive on a simple road. In addition, add a thick cannon barrel, and then this will be a brand new weapon. Roselle's manuscript. Klein sighed silently, and for a moment he didn't know what to say until, finally, Leopard opened the door. In the discussion that followed, the main people talking were Jürgen and Pacheco. The two lawyers would argue with each other and discuss the terms with their employers, while the completely unprepared inventor Leopard sat there in a daze. Only when asked would he give his opinion. Finally, the three parties agreed that Frommes would invest £1,000 to take 20% of the shares, and the shares of Klein and Leopard would fall by an equal ratio, 28% and 52%. At the same time, Frommes agreed to buy a further 18% of Klein's shares at a premium, and this cost him £1,000 after taxes. Similarly, he would buy a 9% stake in the company at a post-tax price for £500. As a result of this deal, Frommes became the largest shareholder in the newly established Backlund Bike Company, with a 47% share. He became responsible for the subsequent industrialization and marketing, while the company would be funded with the £1,000 he invested as the initial capital. Leopard was the second largest shareholder, with 43% of the shares. His job was to help in the setting up of the assembly line for mass production. Mr. Klein, who only had the remaining 10% of the shares, became a purely financial investor. And the £1,000 he earned from selling his shares had sent his personal wealth skyrocketing to £2,235, almost enough for him to buy a main ingredient for a faceless potion. As a private detective, he still continued accepting commissions in the past month or so his daily expenses didn't drain his savings. I still have to pay £50 to lawyer Jürgen, leaving me with £2,185. I'll have to thank Talum when I see him. A thought flashed through Klein's mind. He signed and stamped the contract. Then, he stood up and shook hands with Frommes and Leopard. I hope for a pleasant partnership. Frommes took out his golden pocket watch and looked at it before chuckling. Normally, we should have lunch together to celebrate the closing of a deal, but there's an important person waiting for me. I'm really sorry, but there will still be a lot of opportunities in the future. An important figure, another one. The one behind Talum? The one that I claimed reimbursement from using fake information that points to the Aurora order? Klein suddenly felt a little guilty. He hurriedly smiled and said that he didn't mind. After exiting the house and getting into a carriage, Jürgen suddenly frowned slightly. Sherlock, you agreed too readily. Why do you say that? Klein asked curiously. He didn't even know what Jürgen was talking about. Jürgen said rather seriously, when we were talking about the transfer of shares. Based on your description, and on Frommes' performance, I can imagine a bright market prospect for bikes. Although it's just an invention at the moment, deflating the overall valuation, you should have kept more shares even though £5,000 is a good price. That way you can get better returns in the future. I thought you were only going to sell 8% and have the confidence to haggle for £500, but you actually agreed to 18%. Even if it were only £500, you would have made a several-fold return on the investment. You shouldn't have been in such a hurry. Because I'm in need of money. However, I did agree very readily without any hesitation. It was a huge transaction, so that does seem rather abnormal for me. As Klein thought back to the scene from before, he began to have some doubts deep down. Was I unconsciously influenced by Framis, or that lawyer Pacheco? One of them is a beyonder. Fortunately, the price was fairly reasonable. As he pondered over the matter, Klein said to Jürgen, who was waiting for an answer, "The new year is coming soon." He had no idea how to explain it, so he randomly chose an opening. If the other party was a smart person, then they would go along with the opening and perfect the explanation with their own reasoning. There was no need for Klein to describe it any further. Of course, this was a move aimed at smart people. Ordinary people would end up pressing. So, or what exactly happened? Lawyer Jürgen was obviously a smart man. Noticing Klein's brief silence, he nodded and said, "I understand. What do you understand?" "I haven't even thought of what to say." Klein pointed to the steam metro station in front of them and said, "I'm getting off here. I need to meet an informant." As the steam-powered vehicle roared forward, Framis, who was sitting in the front row, wound down the window and blew out a ring of smoke. He said to the inconspicuous lawyer Pacheco, "Did you use your powers just now?" "It was passively triggered," Pacheco said with a smile. "My powers aren't suitable for such situations. I prefer to face government or enterprise employees." Framis nodded slightly. "I just wanted to remind you, there's no need to use your powers in such situations. Do not let this affect what matters most." "I understand," Pacheco replied in a low voice. East Borough, in a cheap coffee shop. When Klein arrived, old Kohler was already waiting for him. He removed his scarf, took off his hat, sat down across him, fished out a stack of 1 soldi notes, and handed it to him. "For next week's expenses, and a bonus for the information you provided me the last time. That's a total of £1. He was recently very generous with giving bonuses, since he had already found a person to claim them from. Old Kohler, whose face was clearly ruddier than before, received the cash, feeling a little embarrassed. "The information I gave you previously didn't seem to be that important." "No, the importance depends on who wields it. There are a lot of things that you might find trivial, but it's how other people earn their money," Klein explained with a laugh. "What happened this week?" Old Kohler took the stack of bills and stuffed it into his pocket. He said thoughtfully, "Just like before, many people are still looking for the believers of the fool." "Haha, how could anyone believe in the fool? That isn't a good name." The corners of Klein's mouth slightly twitched. "Are they making progress? The Aurora Order is really persistent." Klein thought helplessly. "No, there's no such person." Old Kohler shook his head and then said, "There are a few people organizing strikes recently. They came to me a few times, claiming that they will be fighting for reasonable working hours and salaries. It's a very normal thing in this era, but it can lead to quite serious consequences." Klein thoughtfully said, "Pay attention to the organizers of this matter. But don't be too anxious. Safety first." "All right." Old Kohler cleared his throat and said, "There have been a lot of gangsters and bounty hunters looking for a person these days. I don't know why, but I believe someone has offered a bounty." "Who are they looking for?" Feeling the cold, Klein took a sip of his coffee. The warm liquid ran down his esophagus and warmed his belly. Old Kohler thought for a moment and said, "A man named Isaac Eggers." "Isaac Eggers? Isaac Eggers?" Klein looked up from his coffee cup and stared straight at old Kohler, who was sitting across him. "Isn't that Mr. Isaac's full name? Why would someone suddenly offer a bounty for him?" In Sanguil, relying on his clown powers, Klein feigned indifference as he asked, "Did it say what kind of person he was?" Old Kohler recalled and said, "He seems to be of Balam lineage, and was once a university lecturer." Chapter 411. Coming in Throng seems to be of Balam lineage, a university lecturer. It really is Mr. Isaac, not someone sharing the same name. Using the information provided by Old Kohler, Klein basically confirmed that the person the bounty was aimed at was the suspected descendant of Death, Isaac. Here lies the problem. Who or what organization is looking for Mr. Isaac? The numinous episcopate whose ultimate goal is to revive death? Insangwil who likes to play the mastermind behind the scenes? It's unlikely to be the latter. Insangwil has sealed artifact 0-08, which allows a target to act according to his descriptions, and through a series of coincidences, he can achieve his desired objective. There's no need at all for him to use the gangs and bounty hunters to find Mr. Azek. Wait, what if this is actually an arrangement by sealed artifact 0-08? Realizing that he's now the target of Mr. Azek, but lacks the confidence to clinch victory in battle, Insangwil is using 0-08 to instigate conflict between Mr. Azek and some particular faction, hoping to eliminate his enemy indirectly. And this reward was issued by that faction. It's very possible. However, I can't rule out the numinous episcopate. To get revenge, Mr. Azek might have made contact with them. However, there were major differences between the two parties regarding the resurrection of death, which eventually led to a falling out. Klein instantly thought of two possibilities, and the corresponding reasons. He took a sip of his coffee and said to Old Kohler, "Help me find out who issued this bounty, and its exact price. If it's appropriate, I'll take note of it while I'm at it." "No problem." Old Kohler didn't feel that anything was amiss with Klein's request. From a certain perspective, there were no essential differences between a private detective and a bounty hunter. The only difference was that the former would involve themselves in trivial matters, such as catching adulterers in the act, finding cats, and helping others walk dogs, while they tended to use the powers of deduction more than brute force. When Old Kohler finished describing what he had seen and heard, Klein briefly taught him some of the tricks of leading a conversation based on the Nighthawk's curriculum, as well as the contingency plans for specific scenarios. "It's time for me to go to the docks. Thank you, Detective Moriarty, for allowing me to lead a good life once again." Old Kohler picked up the old, worn-out hat on the table and thanked him sincerely. The detective, in his view, not only provided him with a well-paid job, but he also taught him many useful things. Even if the detective no longer needed him as an informant, the skills he learned would allow him to barely survive in East Borough, especially since he was growing older and less capable of laborious work. A good life. In my opinion, what you have now is the basics of what a person should have. After watching Old Kohler walk out the cheap coffee house, Klein sat there in a daze. This was the first time that he had heard a friend's name from someone else since his arrival in Backlund, and it was also the first time that he might have grasped Insangwil's whereabouts. For the past 3 months, Klein's main goal had been to digest the potion and enhance himself, especially after he killed Lenevis. That was because he knew very well that he and Insangwil, who was most likely a high-sequence Beyonder, had an unbridgeable gap. He couldn't be impatient for revenge, especially when it came to the chilling sealed artifact 0-08. He didn't even have the intention to approach and investigate it. Scenes from the Blackthorn Security Company in Tingen replayed themselves in Klein's mind, and those bright polished shoes clearly appeared before his eyes. Raising his head and slowly letting out a breath, Klein took his scarf and hat and walked out of the cheap coffee shop. Hillston Borough, outside a rather old building. Klein got off the carriage, pressed his hat, and went straight to the door. It was Isengard Stanton's house. The great detective had written to Klein a few days ago, inviting him to come over to discuss a murder case. Mr. Klein, who has been busy with the financing of the bike project, tactfully replied that he had no time to spare as a form of rejection. To his surprise, Isengard Stanton didn't seem to mind, and said that the case had hit a brick wall, making it unlikely that there would be any breakthroughs anytime soon. He was very willing to wait for Detective Sherlock Moriarty's visit, and expressed how he looked forward to an exchange that ignited sparks of wisdom. As such, Klein could only first divine a suitable date for the visit, picking the closest date after the negotiations, which happened to be this afternoon. With that, he wrote back and fixed an appointment. Ding dong, ding dong. Klein rang the bell twice and stepped back to wait. More than 10 seconds later, the door creaked open, and the assistant of the great detective Isengard said with a smile, "Good afternoon, Detective Moriarty. Mr. Stanton is waiting for you in the activity room." Would you like coffee or tea? The assistant was thin and wore gold-rimmed glasses. He looked both refined and professional. Klein looked up at him and said, "Tea. Be sparing on the lemon slices." "No problem." The assistant led Klein into the living room, pointed to the activity room and said, "Sorry, our servants are only temporary, and they just happen to be on their day off today, so I can only trouble you to go over alone." Klein nodded and walked towards the activity room on the first floor. As he lifted his hand to knock on the door, he suddenly felt that something was amiss. "I arranged a visit with Mr. Stanton a few days in advance. Why would I chance upon the temporary servant's day off?" Klein's eyes narrowed, and he pulled out a copper penny. At this moment, the door to the activity room opened due to the knock, producing a tiny crack. In the blink of an eye, as if some seal was lifted, the strong smell of fresh blood poured out and overwhelmed Klein's nose. From what he could see, the reclining chair in the activity room was overturned and was stained with dark red blood. A book lay beside it, its cover facing up. With just that one glance, Klein felt as if he was seeing a murder scene. The name of the book caught his eye: The Devil's Legend of Civilau's Burrow. Devil. Klein was about to make a move when a strong wind suddenly blew in the activity room, quickly pulling the door back. Creak. Klein clearly saw the entire interior of the activity room. The charcoal in the fireplace had long since burned out, and there was no longer any red embers glowing. The coffee table, the sofa, the chairs, the cupboard, and other items had either fallen or shattered. It appeared as if he witnessed an intense battle. There was a lot of blood on the carpet and walls, and a lot of scorch marks, but there was no sign of a body at the scene, not even a stumped limb. Something happened to Detective Stanton? Klein suddenly took a step back, intending to first leave the place. However, almost at the same time, he felt someone lock onto him. Someone was staring at him with a cold and merciless gaze from an unknown location. The moment he made a mistake in his response, he would immediately be met with a fatal blow. How can this be a suitable day to visit Isengard Stanton? Was my interpretation of the revelation wrong? Klein didn't dare to act rashly. However, he was neither too nervous or flustered. Having experienced many battles and performances, he knew that he needed to stay calm during such moments. Tap, tap, tap. Isengard Stanton's assistant walked over with a tray. On the tray was a tin teapot and 2 white porcelain cups. The assistant froze in place when he saw the scene in the activity room. He looked at Klein, his face suddenly filled with fear as he stuttered, "You killed Mr. Stanton." Every time he said a word, a piece of flesh fell from his face as blood gushed out. After he finished speaking, his body was torn to shreds, turning into a dismembered corpse. It was as if he had always been in that state, with everything preceding this being him in a state where he was stitched up. Clang! Crack! The tin pot and white porcelain cup hit the ground at the same time, rolling or splashing, and the tea water quickly soaked the area. Klein didn't move as he stood there watching everything that had happened. This was because he still felt like he was being watched. The person who had caused this series of events appeared to be waiting for him to make a move before leaping onto his back and snapping his neck. After an unknown period of time, in a silent and eerie stalemate, Klein saw the door to Isengard Stanton's house open up as a group of policemen in black and white checkered uniforms stormed in. When they found the nauseating and dismembered corpses on the floor, they drew their revolvers and pointed them at Klein, who stood at the doorway of the activity room. Despite facing the black muzzles of the guns, Klein relaxed. The wordless gaze that seemed to hold a gun to the back of his head disappeared at that instant. Klein raised his hands and laughed helplessly. "I won't say anything until I see my lawyer." Backlund's Chisak police station. Chained to a water pipe, Klein met lawyer Jürgen once again. "I will accompany you during the interrogation." There was nothing unusual about Jürgen's expression, as though Detective Moriarty belonged here. Klein sighed and said, "What a tragedy. I should be considering what I will be eating tonight, not talking to a stone-faced police officer." The thing he was most thankful for today was that due to the Aurora Order's investigation and the attention of the Rose School of Thought's high-sequence Beyonder, he didn't bring any Beyonder items with him. His only revolver was easily concealed from the body search using a magic-like performance. When he entered the interrogation room, he recounted the letter he received from Isengard Stanton about discussing a case, without the police officer's questioning. Later, we'll go to your house with Mr. Jürgen to retrieve these letters. I hope they're still there. The officer in charge of the interrogation switched gears and asked, "How did you get to know Detective Isengard Stanton?" Klein replied without hesitation, "Because of that serial murder case." At this point, he suddenly froze for a moment. It reminded him of something. He had always suspected that there was a master behind the devil dog, the person who had harumphed when the devil dog was killed. Yes, the book Stanton was reading before the attack was The Devil's Legend of Civilau's Burrow. Could it be that the owner of the devil dog is beginning to take revenge after lying low all this time? And Detective Stanton was the person in the police records who provided the main clues or ideas. Furthermore, he was the one who received the bounty reward. Klein quickly had a theory. Chapter 412. Letter. When he thought about the possibility that the devil dog's owner was involved, Klein changed his strategy and decided to recount his involvement with Isengard Stanton in great detail. In addition, he took the initiative to mention Isengard Stanton's assembly of a team of detectives to investigate the serial murder and the portion of the bounty that they successfully obtained. In that commission, although I only gave some ideas, well, in the jargon of the private detective industry, I provided suggestions, but it was still considered the greatest contribution by Mr. Stanton, so I received the bulk of the bounty, Klein concluded. The two officers in charge of the interrogation jotted down the information and asked if anyone could prove it. Klein gave them the names and addresses of Stewart, Kaslana, and the other private detectives. Very good, Mr. Moriarty. Your answer is detailed enough. A police officer stopped writing and asked, "How long did you spend in Isengard Stanton's home today? I mean, from the time you entered to the time we found you." Klein thought for a moment and, without consulting lawyer Jürgen, directly replied, "About 2 to 3 minutes." What he said was based on what he truly felt. Another police officer raised his eyebrows and said, "Many residents nearby were able to confirm that you entered Isengard Stanton's house around 2:10 p.m. We arrived at the scene at 2:28 p.m. Which is to say, you were in the house for about 18 minutes, not 2 or 3 minutes. What exactly were you doing during this lengthy period of time? Why didn't you leave and call the police?" 18 minutes passed. Klein frowned suddenly. He felt that the stalemate he had with the existence which silently watched him lasted for slightly more than a minute. How did it take a full 18 minutes? Was it the strange feeling of being watched that confused my grasp of time? Or was it something else? Is it the beyonder powers of the other party? If it really was the owner of the devil dog, he would at least be at sequence 6, with a high probability of being sequence 5. While Klein pondered, Jürgen leaned forward, ready to accuse the police of posing leading questions. That was not a very good reason, but he simply wanted to use this method to interrupt the pace of the interrogation and delay the unfavorable question for his client. At this moment, Klein raised his hand to rub his forehead. What I just said was the truth. Based on what I felt, only 2 or 3 minutes had passed after I entered Detective Isengard Stanton's house. Upon saying that, he emphasized, "Yes, based on what I felt." The two officers exchanged looks before writing the statement down. After a moment of silence, the officer who had asked the question said, "During those 18 minutes, a servant who came back from outside the house rang the doorbell, but no one answered, so he looked in through the oriel window and saw the floor full of corpses, and that you were standing in the doorway of the activity room. He was terrified, running to the police station like a madman, and many passers-by and some residents had confirmed that." Klein ignored the look in lawyer Jürgen's eyes and shook his head. "I didn't hear the doorbell." The two officers exchanged looks again, but they made no comment. All they did was jot down what was said. They asked questions about other details, and Klein, who had done nothing and was free from guilt, answered every question truthfully. At the end, he couldn't help but ask, "Did you find Detective Isengard Stanton? It didn't seem like the activity room had a corpse. He's likely to be still alive, right?" A police officer used a pen to tap on the table and said, "That's one of the things we're wondering about. Only the activity room in the house had signs of fighting, and the windows were closed, and they hadn't been opened for days. As you know, it's very normal to do so during Backlund's autumn and winter seasons. The attacker and Mr. Isengard Stanton left the room in a strange way, and we found no trace of him anywhere else in the house or in the neighborhood, not even blood." Without waiting for Klein to speak, he questioned before answering his own question. "You definitely wish to mention the activity room's door and the door to the house, but many people have confirmed that there was no pursuit nearby, nor was there anyone taken hostage or a corpse being moved away. Maybe it really happened in the middle of the night. Maybe they were able to go through walls." Klein silently offered other possibilities in his mind, and he silently prayed, "May the goddess bless Detective Isengard Stanton, and that he escaped the disaster." The Evernight goddess was the empress of disaster and horror. When the interrogation was over, Klein was remanded in a small room, and the police sent someone to pick up the letter as evidence with lawyer Jürgen at 15 Minsk Street. It wasn't until the evening that Klein was finally admitted bail, posting a sum of £50. It's much more expensive than the last time. It's difficult for the average private detective to produce that much cash in a short period of time. After leaving the Chisak police station, Klein pulled up the collar of his tweed coat and complained to Jürgen. Jürgen still wore a professional and staid expression. "The situation was favorable towards you the last time, but this time, much of the evidence points to you." He stopped a rental carriage, turned his head to the side, and looked at Klein. "Sherlock, I'm your lawyer. Before you answer the policeman's questions, it's best that you communicate with me, even if it's just sending me a look. Do not speak carelessly even if you feel that there are no problems. Ordinary people who haven't been trained will easily say things that trip them up. I'm used to fabricating my own stories and solving my own problems." Klein recalled what had just happened and gave a hollow laugh. "Okay, I will keep that in mind." Without another word, Jürgen boarded the carriage. Klein sat down across him and thought about Detective Isengard Stanton's attack. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the rumbling sound of his stomach. "It's already past my normal dinner time." Klein took out his gold pocket watch and opened it. He didn't want to waste any more energy preparing food, so he began to think about which restaurant was worth looking forward to. At that moment, Jürgen raised his eyelids and said, "I've asked my grandmother to prepare dinner for 3. How can I impose on you?" Klein was startled for a moment before he laughed. Mrs. Doris's cooking skills are always something to look forward to. By the time they got back to Minsk Street in Sherwood Borough, the sky was completely dark, and the street lamps were even brighter than the indistinct red moon in the sky. After having dinner at the Jürgens house and having fun with the cat, Klein strolled back to Unit 15 in the cold, damp air. He habitually rummaged through the letterbox and pulled out a copy of the Backlund Evening News that had just arrived. Klein opened the door with the newspaper in hand, and just as he put the cane away, he realized something was wrong. His spiritual intuition, as a seer, told him that a stranger had entered his house. Was it the police who came to collect the evidence? Klein looked around warily and suddenly saw a letter on the coffee table. There should have only been newspapers sitting there. Klein entered the living room warily, in preparation for an attack. He moved closer to the coffee table, and during the entire process, the surroundings were completely silent without the slightest abnormality. Glancing down at the letter, Klein first took out a pair of black gloves and wore them before opening the letter. There was a thin piece of paper inside the envelope. After unfolding it, a dark red color was immediately reflected in Klein's eyes, and the faint smell of blood lingered around his nose. Words were written on the piece of paper with coagulated blood. "All of you will die." Is it really the owner of the devil dog? Is he taking revenge on the people who caused his subordinate's death? This is truly a case of bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Why not directly find the Nighthawks responsible for the cleanup operation? Klein's heart tightened, and many thoughts flashed through his mind. but he quickly dismissed his complaint. It was very normal to exact vengeance on the person that one could handle. Just like his past few months in Backland, he had never thought of finding in Sanguil, but he never gave up his pursuit of Lenivus. After looking around again, Klein gradually found that this matter was a little confusing. Isn't he afraid of being caught by the official Beyonders by using such an ostentatious method to exact revenge? Is this the acting requirement for his potion? Or rather, because Detective Isengard Stanton escaped, he knows that he can't get rid of his targets in secret, so he can only switch his methods. But what's the reason behind this method? Also, when I was at Detective Stanton's house, he was clearly watching me. Why didn't he make a move? Was he apprehensive towards an ordinary private detective like me? No, impossible. Does he know that I'm a Beyonder? Possible. Due to the side effect of me getting lost due to the master key, I had met with the devil dog. It saw my body and how I looked like. Although I was disguised, I can't be certain that a devil can see through it. Perhaps after that incident, it was able to present the scene to its owner in some way. However, at that time, I couldn't even defeat the devil dog, so I could only run away pathetically. What is there to be afraid of? Unless he's worried about something else, such as the injured Isengard Stanton, who might be hiding nearby? Did he write to me very openly, thinking that I, a wild Beyonder, wouldn't dare to seek help from the officials? With his head filled with questions, Klein inspected the house and walked all the way to the second floor. When he opened the bedroom door, another letter came into view. The letter lay quietly on the desk, as though it had been waiting for him for a very long time. Klein opened the letter and saw a line of dark red words that were drawn. "You're next." Next? How arrogant. Klein couldn't help but sigh. At this moment he suddenly had a thought. He raised his head and looked outside the window. Across him were a few two-story houses with their lights on. The glow of the street lamps fell on their outer walls, forming a crisscrossing zone. All of a sudden, the shadows in the area squirmed and twisted, forming a black shadow in a tailcoat. The shadow raised its right hand, gesturing in the shape of a gun, and pointed it at Klein. Then it retracted its arm and blew at the gun's muzzle. Immediately after, it silently fell back, transforming into countless disconnected shadows. Chapter 413. Visitors inside the Rice Police Station, which was in charge of Minsk Street and the surrounding district. Klein shook hands with the officer who escorted him out. This threatening letter must have had something to do with the previous serial murders. The organizer of the detective team, the great detective, Mr. Isengard Stanton, has already been attacked this afternoon. Please take it seriously. The police officer retracted his hand and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Moriarty. We definitely won't ignore your suggestion and immediately report it to the higher-ups." "Thank you so much." Klein put on his hat and walked out the door. After seeing the two threatening letters and the provocation from the suspected devil dog's master, Klein didn't hesitate to bring the evidence to the nearest police station to report the case. He secretly hoped that the matter would be transferred to the mandated punishers or the machinery hivemind team as quickly as possible, so that he could be placed under the protection of official Beyonders. Although he no longer had any reason to keep his identity as a detective, being fully capable of giving up his residence at 15 Minsk Street and switching to another residence and identity, he suspected that this might have been the purpose of the author of that threatening letter. Using the fear of wild Beyonders being exposed, the perpetrator was forcing him to flee under the cover of the night. Then, during this process, he could seize the opportunity to launch an attack. Actually, it's quite a suitable time to attack me, while I was heading over to the police station to report the incident. It's the same as when I was at home. That fellow has other plans. Confused and wary, Klein returned to Minsk Street. As soon as he got out of the carriage, he saw a figure loitering in front of his house with the help of the street lamps amid the drizzle. Klein's heart skipped a beat, but he immediately relaxed as he recognized the visitor. It was Stuart, a slim private detective with a medium build, who adored him. "I can't be careless. What if the subsequent sequences of devil has a power similar to faceless? Klein gripped his cane tight and slowly approached. Then he gave a probing shout. Detective Stewart abruptly turned his head and nervously said, "Mr. Moriarty, I received a threatening letter. It said, 'All of you will die.' You received it as well." Klein blurted out in surprise while also finding it understandable. Stewart was also one of the detectives that Isengard Stanton had gathered for the investigation of the serial murders. Stewart's eyes widened abruptly. "You received it too?" "Yes." Klein nodded seriously. "More than one actually," he added silently. "What should I do?" "I first went to visit Mr. Stanton, but I heard that he was attacked. So I immediately came to you." "Oh, thank God for his blessings. I was about to leave." Stewart blurted out. Klein pointed to the door. "Let's talk inside." After entering the living room, Klein excused himself to the bathroom and hurriedly went above the gray fog to perform 2 divinations. First, it was to confirm that the person was Stewart, and second, if there was any relatively serious danger that night. He received a revelation confirming both. In other words, Stewart wasn't the enemy in disguise, and it would be a night of considerable danger. Of course, that danger might not happen right in front of Klein, but someone might be wiped out in secret. That was the limitation of divination. All he could receive was a revelation of a certain degree, not the entire answer. He was unable to get a precise answer. Furthermore, the limitations in mysticism couldn't be solved by techniques such as exclusion or dichotomy. Returning to the real world, Klein pressed the mechanical button of the toilet bowl, and in the midst of the splashing water, he washed his hands and opened the door. "Stewart, would you like coffee or tea?" Klein asked in a completely composed manner. Stewart stood up and shook his head. "No, we should discuss the problem first. Although I've received many threatening letters in the past, none of them can be compared to what I received today. He must have written them using fresh blood. My intuition tells me that he'll definitely take action, and that he has the ability to do so. By the way, Mr. Stanton was attacked by that same person, wasn't he?" "I think so," Klein said stoically before sitting down. "This likely has something to do with the previous serial murders. The common thing that you, me, and Mr. Stanton share in common is that case." Stewart's reaction is a little too extreme. Is he spooked out by the attack on Mr. Stanton? At the same time, Klein was carefully observing Stewart. Being infected by his attitude, Stewart calmed down significantly. He sat down again and said while deep in thought, "It seems to be the case." Before he could finish his sentence, tinkling sounds suddenly echoed in the room. Someone had rung the doorbell. Stewart instantly jolted, like a frightened bird. Klein frowned as he looked at him, before getting up to head for the door. As soon as he touched the handle, the scene outside appeared in his mind. The visitors were Detective Kaslana in her gray tweed coat, her red-haired assistant Lydia, and several other men who looked familiar. They're all the private detectives who Mr. Stanton had assembled. As expected, as Klein recalled, he recognized the visitors. He pulled open the door and took 2 steps back. With bushy eyebrows and slightly drooping cheeks, Kaslana looked at Klein and Stewart, who was behind him. Without exchanging pleasantries, she bluntly said, "We've all received the same threatening letter, so I believe you guys did too, right?" "Yes," Klein replied solemnly. Kaslana didn't shy away from exhaling a breath of white mist. "We were all assembled by Mr. Stanton to participate in the investigation of the serial murders. That's the only thing we have in common." "I think so too." Klein pointed inside his house. "Let's talk inside." Watching the 6 private detectives enter, Klein quickly analyzed the intentions of the Devil Dog's master. To stir up such a huge commotion, this will soon attract the attention of the official Beyonder organizations. Who knows, there might be a demigod powerhouse guarding this area. So how would he take his revenge? He's just being provocative, making the military and the Beyonders from the 3 churches send people to protect all these private detectives. With the official Beyonders not daring to be negligent, it will scatter personnel and exhaust them by making them run around. Is all this to take revenge on the main target of the attack from back then? In the process, He might even have a chance to kill some of the official Beyonders. As for the private investigators, he will only take action much later, once their wariness has relaxed. Of course, if probes such as this give an opening, then he definitely wouldn't let it go. To devils who can sense danger ahead of time, this is a method that plays on their strengths. However, the three churches, together with the military and the royal family, have many experts in sealed artifacts. They have no lack of demigods or grade 0 and grade 1 sealed artifacts. Is the master of the devil dog so certain that there are no powers or items that can restrain this strength of his? No, he definitely wouldn't dare. The official powers, especially the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hive mind, have been fighting devils for who knows how many years. In the fourth epoch, even in the more ancient third epoch, there was no lack of similar deeds. The master of the devil dog is at most a sequence 5. As long as anything goes wrong, to the point of nothing going wrong, he can be torn apart by a demigod or a terrifying sealed artifact. Why would he still dare to make such attempts? Or it could be said that he's simply toying with the officials, and that he wouldn't act, doing it time and time again. Yes, there's another possibility. Using the threatening letter, he's able to get more than half the targets gathered together. Then, using the official Beyonder organizations' counterbalancing of each other, and the procedural and bureaucratic tendencies, create a time delay. The attack on Mr. Isengard Stanton must have been handed over to the machinery hive mind, who is in charge of supernatural affairs in Hillston Borough, but the ones who killed the devil dog were mainly comprised of the Nighthawks. The two organizations definitely don't communicate in detail too much. Well, it can also be assigned based on Mr. Stanton's faith. Which deity does he believe in? I don't seem to know, nor can I tell. In short, with so many private investigators living in different districts and with different faiths, the division of jurisdiction is a troublesome matter, and joint operations aren't so easy to achieve. At this moment, the ones protecting us should only be 2 or 3 groups of official Beyonders. At the very most, they would be at the level of deacons, and they wouldn't use sealed artifacts which are too powerful or dangerous. Even a demigod high-sequence Beyonder wouldn't direct their gaze over to us that quickly. This would give the devil dog's master a chance. Although 3 to 4 groups of official Beyonders can definitely kill 1, or even more than 1 sequence 5. As long as he takes advantage of the situation, there's a good chance that he can successfully escape. Klein was able to deduce 2 or 3 possibilities in just 20 to 30 seconds, and giving each of them a preliminary opinion. Thinking of the divination outcome that indicated that there would be significant danger tonight, Klein thoughtfully nodded his head, closed the door, and entered the living room. He said to the sitting or standing detectives, "Have you called the police?" There are almost half of the people, who were assembled back then, gathered here. He surveyed the detectives and muttered inwardly. Representing the rest, Kaslana replied, "Some have called the police, while others have tried to find Mr. Stanton or familiar friends. Finally, all of us got together and discussed about visiting you, the great detective." Klein gently nodded and deliberately said, "Everyone, don't be too nervous. The person who sent the letter should be trying to get revenge for that serial murder. But he's only one person, with at most 1 or 2 companions. As for us, we have a total of 8 detectives, all skilled in combat and shooting, so why should we be afraid of him? Besides, we were not the only ones assembled by Mr. Stanton, and it must be the same for those who received the threatening letters. They just didn't end up meeting you or come to visit me." Upon hearing his words, Kaslana and her assistant Lydia revealed doubtful expressions, as if they were unsure of something. Another detective took a deep breath. "Mr. Moriarty, perhaps it's as you say, we need not be afraid of him. But he's a sinister snake lurking in the dark. No one knows when he will launch an attack, and no one can guard against it in advance. Furthermore, he might even harm our family members." "Family members? Oh, my wife. No, my little angel." The detectives were instantly overwhelmed by their emotions, as they exhibited exaggerated reactions. Standing behind Klein, Stuart was trembling with fear and anger. "No, I don't want that," he murmured, almost losing control of his emotions. Just as Klein and Kaslana attempted to calm them down, Stuart suddenly drew his gun and aimed it at the back of Klein's head. His eyes were glazed over, and his emotions seemed to have completely overwhelmed him. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.